Have you ever been blindsided by a betrayal so profound it reshapes your entire existence? That was the day my life took an unexpected detour. Coming home early to surprise my wife, I found betrayal waiting in my bedroom. "How could you?" I asked, the hurt in my voice barely masking my disbelief. Silence was her only reply, a silent admission of guilt as the echoes of a stranger's laughter from our bed cut deep. From trust to treachery, my journey through the aftermath of infidelity and the quest for redemption begins. This is my story. Enjoy watching it. My name is Nathan Hale, and I am 37. I thought my life would follow the direction I had planned, but that was not to be. I got home early one day from work where I am a rising bank manager for a well-known bank. Therefore, I will not mention their name. Given that it was our anniversary, how foolish was I? I didn't notice the signals until my now ex-wife and her then-boy toy were entwined on my bed. I shall never say her name again. Therefore, let us call her. Which 3 or 4 must have a name. Right. And the shoe fits the 304's nerve in telling me to go so they could finish. Well, I made it out okay. Straight to a motel. Will you ever sleep in that bed or place again? There was no telling how many men she had screwed behind her back. Before I go any further, let me tell you a little about our prior marriage. We got married pretty young. That is what 2 dumb kids do when they are allegedly in love. I knew I loved her at that time. Now I'm wondering if she ever loved me in the first place. Anyway, 1 year into our marriage, our daughter was born. 2 years later, we had our son. I know what you are thinking. They are not mine. Given her haunting tendencies, I hate to puncture your bubble. Yes, they are. I had them tested a week after leaving their mother. As I mentioned, I was in my motel room and had paid cash. I didn't want the witch to know where I was. If she went online and looked up the charge on our shared card, it was hours until tomorrow when I paid the darn thing off and canceled it. I couldn't do much with my cash at the moment due to the late hour of the day, so I knew I had to act quickly once the sun rose tomorrow to secure what I had fought so hard for. I wasn't going to give her a penny more than I had to in the divorce settlement. Screw forgiveness. I wanted the witch to burn. So there I was, making phone calls and searching the internet for the greatest divorce lawyer in the city. Money was not an issue. I made 6 figures, and with a promotion approaching, I could easily withstand the damage to my account. Furthermore, being in the banking industry. I was aware of all the loopholes to keep the courts from seizing my money, but that would have to wait until tomorrow when I walked into the office, assuming I went in. I was thinking about going home and collecting my items while she was at work. I didn't care whether the witch noticed my items were gone. I know the witch tried phoning me several times, but I never answered. Then the texts began to flow in, telling me I could come home, now that she has cleaned up. And it meant nothing if I didn't make a big deal about it. Did the witch not recognize me? When 6 o'clock in the evening arrived, it became begging time, and I knew the kids would be home, asking about me. No doubt, given that I'm normally home by then, he was wondering when I'd return so we could celebrate our anniversary with dinner. At this point, I felt the witch had completely lost her mind. Did she really think I'd want to celebrate our wedding anniversary after discovering her with another man in my bed? She truly must be foolish. That's when my daughter called. I hated lying to her, but I was not going home. Not that night or ever again, unless I was packing my belongings. "Hello, honey," I answered after bracing myself. "Dad, where are you? Mom is freaking out." "Good." I assumed this meant she couldn't find me or she was worried. I already told the kids about what, a 304 she was. Both seemed plausible. "Sorry, baby, I had to take a business trip on very short notice, but do not worry. I am not alone. Do you remember Miss Tyler?" "Yeah, she was a lovely lady. But why are you on a business trip with Miss Tyler?" The sound of the witches brought an ugly grin to my lips. "What?" That I could hear across the line. I knew the witch despised her guts. I never understood why. Chris, her first name, was a really compassionate woman who was also a lesbian. So I'm not sure why the witch always felt threatened by her. Now that I think about it, perhaps she was scared that someone would sweep me off my feet and take me away from the 304. I wish somebody had. Then I wouldn't have wasted 17 years with the 3040. the conference presenter whom I was unable to attend because to today's significance. My sarcasm was obvious. Not that my daughter caught up on it. I stated that in case the witch was listening, then got stomach poisoning and had to drop out. So, being one of the few managers who knew the content, my boss asked if I could fill in, as Miss Taylor had already left. So, we are traveling together. But when will you get home? I do not know. Maybe 1 week. Miss Taylor wants to explore the city while we are there. So I just heard my daughter's phone being taken from her hand. Nat, you came home, right? This instance? It's Nathan or Mr. Hal for you. 3 or 4. I could tell she was taken aback by my tone of voice. You lost all rights to that moniker when I discovered you screwing another man in my goddamn bed. Now, Nathan, I understand you're upset. We can work it out. It meant nothing. It means something to me. Foolish. Which is okay if you want to act like a hurt little child and avoid talking about it like responsible adults. Go ahead. If you prefer to stay away, that's great. But remember this, I am going to screw every male in this home from now on. Go ahead. You're dead to me now, regardless. I heard her gasp as I terminated the line, and things went downhill quickly from there, especially when she returned home the next day to find the house vacant of anything belonging to me. I had movers come in and box everything in a few hours so I would never have to return to that house. I kept it in a storage unit across town for 3 months, paying cash, until I could find an apartment in the city. My marriage might be over, but I wasn't going to abandon my children. I had an appointment with a lawyer the day after I moved out. I also canceled our combined bank account and transferred half of the money to one set up in her name before moving. What? Cash? I wanted to keep money out of the court's hungry hands and offshore where she couldn't touch a penny. I was very amused. I made a huge show of hammering that worthless gold band into nothing but garbage in front of everyone at work before discarding the lump of metal. If that didn't spark rumors, I'm not sure what would. So, after speaking with my lawyer, she took a pee while observing the witch's moves. I'm not sure why, but whatever. I don't really care. I only wanted the cheating 3-4 foregone. However, when the witch was served, everything went completely out of control. I wish I had been there. I imagine the expression on that 3-4's face was priceless. I have to confess, the lawyers or PI, I got some extremely juicy details, and I was a vengeful scumsucker. Hey, if you screw a married woman, you should expect punishment. Based on what I heard afterward. None of those males who couldn't keep their tools in their pants came out with a single dime, especially the witch's boss. I heard his wife had taken him for everything, a full $20 million. When I heard that his wife was a clever cookie and got a prenup with an infidelity clause, I rolled on the floor and laughed so hard. Nonetheless, I missed my children. The witch was interfering with my court-appointed visiting days, which my attorney managed. I didn't need to be there, but I heard the judge tell her that if she heard of another missing visitation, she would lock the witch up for violating a court order, the first and subsequent visits. It did not go as well as I hoped. My children blamed me for the breakup of our family. I assured them that I was not the one who ended our relationship. That was their mom, not delving into too many details. However, I did tell them that I had discovered their mother with another man in our bed. That was why I couldn't accompany their mother. Then one day my world came crumbling down around me. Dad, do we have to keep doing this? My 16-year-old daughter at the time inquired. What do you mean, honey? I inquired, curious about what she meant while we ate lunch at Hardee's. I thought it unusual that the witch was still sitting in the parking lot. I mean, do we have to continue coming on weekends? My heart dropped to my gut as the words left my daughter's lips. Do you not want to see me? I inquired gently as I set down my drink. I don't mean only on weekends. We can still visit each other for birthdays and holidays. Is this what you want? I inquired, glancing at my nearly 14-year-old kid. Dad, why are you making such a huge deal out of this? It's only sex. Can't we simply get back to how things were? My brow wrinkled as my own son refused to look me in the eyes. So I'm merely the giver of gifts to you. Is that all I'm good at? See, that does not work for me. I am your father, or I am not. Choose, I replied harshly. I hoped they wouldn't fall for their mother's BS. Apparently, I was mistaken. Okay, Mom's boyfriend is nice. He sends us places while you are not present. You know, I yelled, slapping my drink off the table and making my kids jump installment. Fine. You don't want me as your father anymore. So be it. Then I no longer have children. Have a lovely life with it. I went away from the restaurant and their life. Did I hear them call afterward? Of course I did, but I wasn't about to turn around and let them stick another knife into my heart. Not that I wanted to. However, if your children no longer want you, you may not want to stay in the same place, because I was a mess. I raised those children. I want to. They cheered during every single boring game. Why? Because that is what fathers do. Be there for their children, at least for those who enjoy them. So when the promotion offer came in, I didn't even blink. When they told me I'd have to relocate to Charlotte, North Carolina to take over as regional manager for the Southeast. There. I had sold off the bedroom furniture I had purchased for my children in the hopes that they would want to move in with me once I found a large enough apartment for us. Why maintain things if you know they will just make you feel worse than you already do? Did the children try to call? Of course. Did I respond? Nope. If they didn't want me, I'd rather not hear their voices. A person's heart may only be broken so many times before becoming irreparable. So when it was time to sign the divorce papers, the witch had the guts to bring the prick. She has been screwing behind my back, too. This didn't need to happen in Mr. Hall, the witch murmured, her smug expression swiftly dissipating when she noticed my rage. We could have reached an agreement, but you chose to waste 17 years. I know 3 or 4. You did. The moment you permitted that jerk between your legs. So don't blame it on me. And I wasn't going to let you keep stringing me along just so you could have a live-in nanny while you threw yourself out. All right. I will admit I did. So what? I had a great time doing that. I looked down as my lawyer put her hand on my arm, preventing me from doing something dumb. Miss Smith, we're not here for you to irritate my client. If that's all you're here for, I believe the meeting is ended and we'll see you in court, my lawyer said, gathering her documents as she stood. All right. Which side? The only positive outcome was that no alimony was awarded. The one who believed that slime sucker loved her and was planned to marry him before the ink was dry. Well, I say, keep screwing 3 or 4 times and make her turn tricks. Then she would have earned the term. Taking out my checkbook. The one check I was most looking forward to signing. I wrote up the entire amount of child support for the next 6 years and gave it to my lawyer with a note in the memo section that said, "Eat shit, choke on it, and die." After signing the divorce papers and seeing the tiny smirk on my lawyer's face as she read what I wrote, then sliding the check over the table as I rose, I didn't want to be in the same room as the person with whom I felt filthy. What is this? That is the total amount for your child support. Do not expect another check. As I continued my journey away from my past life, I heard my lawyer mention something. You cannot do that. There is no legislation barring Mr. Howe from paying the entire sum of his child support all at once. Nathan. I heard the witch cry but didn't give a damn. That was the final thing she would ever receive from me. I gave my lawyer my new address for the condo the firm had provided for me in Charlotte so she could mail the divorce decree to me when it arrived. Personally, I would burn the damn thing. I no longer wanted to be reminded that I was married to that low-down type of person. I was gone 1 hour after the divorce was signed. I no longer had any reason to stay in that city. When my parents went over to the apartment a few days after my departure, they told me how devastated the kids were when they discovered I no longer resided there. I'd want to say I wasn't concerned, but they were still my children, even if they no longer wanted me as a parent. I found it odd that they would bother going there in the first place. Perhaps it was because I hadn't answered their calls in over 3 weeks. Or perhaps I wish they realized their mistakes. Regardless, it was too late. They made the bed. It was time to go on with my life. Although they did beseech me to speak with them, or at least give them my new phone number, which I had changed the moment I left the city, I simply and firmly refused, saying that they wanted this. I didn't. It was time for them to learn. Actions have serious repercussions, even if it breaks my heart. 7 years later, I'm 44. Even my wife admits that the first 2 years I lived in Charlotte, I was a bitter a-hole. Given that I came in my new location without a wife or children, I didn't have much of a social life during those years. I immersed myself in my work with no social life. I also visited the gym. Granted, I did become a little fat, but I prioritized my family, or did in this case, before going to the gym. How foolish was it, considering the outcome? I met my second wife, Catalina, after my second year there. I have to say, she had some guts to walk into my office and demand that I pull whatever crawled up my bum out of there. I could not help myself. I almost fell out of my chair laughing so hard at the woman's arrogance. I'd seen Catalina about the building before, but just briefly, so that you can laugh and smile. As she grinned, Catalina's speech took on an exotic, enticing tone. I will never tell her this, but I believe she knows I was captivated with her. I mean, no one has ever spoken to me like that, at least not at work. I had an atmosphere around me that said, piss off and die. But here was this 5'1" Hispanic woman who couldn't weigh more than pound 100, dripping wet and mouthing off to the regional boss of the company's banking division. Catalina has silky ebony hair that is as soft as silk. Her beautiful brown eyes never contained any anger, not like mine did at the time. Her plump lips called for a kiss. I tried to make things professional, though. My eyes ignored my brain's command as they examined her small physique. And I liked what I saw. Nathan, how I presented myself after rising from my seat. Catalina Rodriguez. She returned the welcome with a sparkling smile. So, at the age of 39, I began to rebuild my life. Do not get the incorrect impression. Catalina didn't immediately jump into my arms. It took me 3 months to establish a connection with her before she even considered going on a date with me. She learned about my story and what led me to Charlotte, just as I had with her. People who claim to love you appear to be your deadliest foes, capable of causing the most damage. Given that she had caught her then-fiancé in bed with another man, it took me back a bit. However, cheating is cheating, regardless of gender. I felt for her, but I attempted to reassure her that she found out right once, rather than 17 years later, as I did gradually. I no longer felt angry. I confirmed with HR that Catalina and I dating would not cause any issues, which it would not, seeing as she was in a separate department. On our 4th date, we finally had sex. Not that I didn't want to do it sooner before that. However, Catalina was hesitant to get connected with a man again. I cannot blame her. It took me 2 years to trust a lady again. Dating Catalina was a very different experience than dating the witch. When the topic of children came up, I was mute. She could tell I was holding something back. She does ambush me at the most inconvenient times, like as when she asked me why I wouldn't talk about children as she was writing me quickly. And I loved it. They have disowned me. I looked aside. Even after so much time had passed, the pain remained. What? She was clearly taken aback. It was not something her family members would have done. Catalina comes from an extremely close-knit family. By then, I'd met them. They were a wonderful group of folks, despite the fact that I knew they were talking about me in Spanish. I didn't tell Catalina I was taking Spanish classes, since that's something you do for the person you love. So when she grew angry, I understood what she was calling me. Let's face it. I am a male. I am an idiot. I will make mistakes from time to time. Ultimately, I am human. Honey. Catalina calmed down as she grabbed hold of my face, allowing me to stare at her. I'm sorry they threw you away like that. Hey, I didn't mind that she buried my face in her firm breasts when I told her what had transpired that day. Have you considered about having more? My eyes widened while still in that magnificent meadow. Catalina. Yes, I understand. But we had been dating for a year. But I'm not getting any younger. She was 33 at the time. I enjoy listening to you talk about anything. I appreciate how you listen to my rants without becoming emotional. You need to solve something and you just let me vent. Believe me, that woman can vent like it's nothing. Do not tell her this. But sometimes I irritate her simply to make her angry. And let me tell you, she is hot as hell when she is angry. There's also angry sex. I believed I died the first time we had that type of coitus. I know we've both been hurt badly, but I want this. I want you. What are you saying, Catalina? I inquired once she had freed my head. However, I desperately wanted to return to that valley. I'm saying she was very cute when she blushed like that. I want to have a baby, and I want you to be the dad. Honey, is this the appropriate time to discuss this? I inquired. As previously stated, she brings up very important things at the most inconvenient times. I had to bite my lip as she shook her head in a childlike manner. There isn't time to discuss it right now, after all. Squeezing her folds as she flowed forward towards me, I fell back onto the bed. This is why I stopped taking birth control. I know that woman harmed you. I understand it's taken you a long time to trust me. I didn't admit it. I knew. You questioned my faithfulness. I never judged you for it, as I'm sure you felt. My aloofness is causing things to escalate with you. But haven't I demonstrated to you that I am nothing like that woman? You're not like her, for sure. I agreed. But won't your parents be upset if you have a child outside of marriage? I knew they would be. They were ardent Catholics, and I knew they would not be pleased with this white man knocking up their daughter without a ring on her finger. That's when I noticed the mischievous grin appear, and I realized I'd gone straight into her trap. Mr. Hale, what are you trying to say? Are you suggesting you want to marry me? She was still riding me when she posed this question. Not as hard as before, but just enough to keep me on the edge. Her face filled mine as she leaned forward and rested her hands on either side of my head. That curtain of ebony hair encircled me, leaving me with only her precious face to steal. If you know this, I'll be the best wife you've ever had. You won't lack for anything. I'm not going to give you up. Ever. Did I truly want to get married again? Was I even ready for such a commitment? Honestly, I had no idea. However, as I looked up into her brown eyes, I couldn't imagine a future without her in it. I knew that saying no would mean the end of us. The prospect of her leaving my life, having to see her every day at work and knowing what I had thrown away. It grieved even more to discover that my first wife was nothing more than a cheating 3 or 4C shouted in Spanish. I didn't want to admit just yet that I could say more than yes or no. I wasn't proficient in it yet, but I could understand what they said. I watched as those eyes softened, moistened, and quivered simultaneously. Then she continued to love the shit out of me, and I relished every moment of it. That weekend was Catalina's monthly family gathering. I noticed her surrounded by her mother, aunts, female relatives, and 2 sisters, all of whom were speaking quickly in Spanish that I couldn't understand from my vantage position, seeing as her uncle by marriage was a big talker. Even while you were standing right next to the dude. I couldn't hold it against the man. The man was getting deaf after years of performing construction jobs without proper hearing protection. I was sipping on my Corona, not my brand. However, guests cannot protest when they are provided a complimentary beer. This would be unpleasant and insulting to the host. And Catalina would have my hide if I ever treated her family rudely without a solid reason. That's when I noticed those women's expressions shift from eagerly listening to disbelief, then pure excitement, as they surged from their seats and embraced Catalina. That's when her mother rushed up to me, speaking quickly in Spanish. Not that she couldn't speak English, she could. However, people from other countries typically return to their home tongue whether they are joyful or angry. So I did not capture everything. I was still at the intermediate level. But I did catch my son. My son, as she repeatedly kissed each of my cheeks, tears in her eyes. I'll only proceed if you're in Hector's. Her husband and Catalina's father give their blessing. I spoke in the best Spanish I could. I could see everyone's eyes shift to me in shock. They had no notion I spoke their language. Granted, not very effectively at the time, but I could communicate in it. I comprehended it better than I could pronounce it. "Nathan, baby, when did you learn Spanish?" Catalina inquired in English, full of astonishment and joy. Since I believe she knew, I did it so that I might comprehend her heritage and avoid becoming an outsider in her family. When you answered yes to our first date, I responded in Spanish, witnessing her hands go to her mouth and her tears of joy rim her eyes as she looked at me. "Are you fluent?" her mother inquired. "Why don't you bother speaking English?" "No, I am still learning, I understand you. But I can't pronounce things correctly yet," I said in their language. "You will get there. See, Catalina, this is absolutely a keeper. Much better suited to you than that last one." Her mother gave an approving nod. "And I'll never let him go?" Catalina talked dreamily and sincerely. From that point forward, English was prohibited from the gatherings. They could also assist me improve my Spanish. Catalina took her lessons to a whole new level. I believe that if Catalina taught me at school, learning another language would be easier. However, given how Catalina's lessons were taught in her bedroom, I don't think her method would be appropriate for school. Trust me, I learnt a whole new set of curse words that I'll enjoy using. When it came time to tell my folks that I was getting remarried. I dreaded returning to that city after 3.5 years. If my daughter attended college, I was confident she would be there. After what happened at the restaurant, I had to distance myself from them. Otherwise, I'd murder myself over the loss of my children, who meant everything to me before they took out my heart. They were aware that I was dating again. They just didn't expect to see Catalina standing beside me when I arrived at my childhood home. Were they pleased to see me? Of course. Did they pester me to contact my children again? Yes. Did I? Not a chance. I wasn't going to open the can of worms. They were thrilled for both of us. I saw my children's disappointment at my refusal to reconnect with them. We stayed till Sunday afternoon before driving to the airport. As we drove to the airport, I believed I saw my daughter pass us in an old 1996 style automobile. However, the slamming of their brakes raised suspicions that it was my daughter. Did I make a stop? Nope. 6 months later, Catalina and I were married. I flew my parents in for it. They were not pleased. I did not invite my children, but they did choose a side. They did not want me in their life. Why should I include them in mine? What? Nobody knew at the moment that Catalina was already a month pregnant. We spent our honeymoon on a cruise line. That was nice. Not my cup of tea, but pleasant. Then married life set in. I knew what to expect. Catalina didn't. Did she make a few mistakes? Of course, so did I. But we are humans. We are fallible. Did her out-of-control hormones make me crazy? Yeah, I'm sure some of my oddities did as well. But we did talk. We worked through all of it. Man and wife should not hide. There will be no more playing around with the other or any of the nonsense the witch has done over the last 17 years. I was unfortunate to know her. The big day arrived, when Catalina's water broke while she was at her work one day. I received the call right away and rushed to reach her. Our daughter, Nathan Hale, was born at 2 a.m. The next morning, she cried to the sky with exquisite black hair, much like her mother. As I stood there with bated breath watching the two of them as Catalina held Alondra in her arms, I couldn't think of a more lovely sight than Catalina's loving glance down at our daughter. Catalina whispered, "I love you so much," as she clasped my hand. "You've given me the most wonderful gift I could have asked for, even soaked in sweat from the anguish of childbirth." Catalina was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever had. It is the most fortunate of destiny to know. "I also love you, now and forever," I muttered as I pushed my forehead to hers, then kissed her and my daughter. "Will you receive them? They must be desperate to figure out what's going on," Catalina asked, sliding her thumb against the back of my hand. "Sure, honey," I responded with a warm smile on my lips. The women in her family gathered around the bed, gushing over my baby, while the men congratulated me. I thanked them, of course, but stated Catalina had done the hard work. All I got was a fractured hand, and to my surprise, everyone laughed. So life went on as it always does. I believe I went without sleep for a month one time during the first year following a laundress birth because all I recall was a waking fog. However, I have experience with this while caring for my other children. Alondra was not once dismissed or neglected. She was extremely spoilt. Catalina's relative attended to it. I am guilty as well, but I'm the father. I am expected to spoil my daughter. It's in the unspoken rules of fatherhood. 3 years had gone and Alondra was attending childcare. I was viewing the stream that the daycare provided for those with children in their care. I know Catalina watched it as well, since she would contact me and remind me to switch on the feed whenever Alondra did something cute. We had taught Alondra both English and Spanish before she began to speak. I wasn't going to deny her that after all. Her mother sings to her in Spanish, and what child wouldn't want to know what their mother was singing to them? Although I'm not sure where Alondra learnt Spanglish during the last few months, she's developed the habit of utilizing all three in a discussion, which threw me off guard for a while before I looked it up. Were our lives perfect till that point? No, nothing is perfect. However, if you collaborate, stick together through thick and thin, and communicate with one another, it may be nearly perfect. That's when my cell phone rang. I didn't realize it at the time, but my past was about to catch up. To me, taking it up and answering it without checking the caller ID. If I had, I might not have responded. "Hello?" I said, smiling as I watched Alondra play with her pals. "Dad?" My heart was in my ears, thumping so hard that it nearly drowned out my daughter's voice. "Dad, please talk to me." "Who is this?" I asked, knowing just who it was. Don't you recall my voice? Dad? I'm your daughter. My only daughter is 4 years old. I expressed my displeasure about having to end the call. I stared for a minute as my phone rang again and again. Yes, Dad, please speak to me. I could hear her cries as she pleaded with me. What do you want, Amber? Is your new stepfather not making you feel all warm and fuzzy now? I asked. My resentment was obvious. What could you possibly desire from the man who brought you into this world, raised and cared for you after you abandoned him for something fresh and shiny? Please, Dad, let us not argue. Please. I heard her tone of voice. I sensed she was about to have a breakdown. Then tell me what you want so that I can get back to seeing my baby. I'm getting married. Lucky you. Let us hope you did not take after your mother or the person you are marrying. Does not have a wandering eye, because you know, some of us make marriage vows. Very serious. I raised an eyebrow when it sounded like someone had taken Amber's phone. Mister, I realize you don't know me, but I am your daughter's fiancé. I have to repeat that I only have one daughter. If you are referring to the woman who was on the phone, I am no longer her father. This was not my doing. That is on her. So, what do you want from me? I asked, pressing my finger against my desk. So she was wondering if you would walk her down the aisle. And why can't her stepfather do that? If you're referring to the man your former wife married. That did not last. Why aren't I surprised? So, what should I tell her? Tell her to find someone else. I have only one daughter, I repeated, and do not call me again. Was I purposefully cruel? Maybe. I am not sure. I believe my pain has never subsided since then. Rejection found its way into my words. I should not have answered the phone again, yet I did. I missed hearing my daughter's voice. What? I exhaled. Please, Daddy, do not hang up. I apologize. I was stupid. I should not have listened to Mom. She felt if we did that, you'd return home. But you didn't, and I lost my daddy. I leaned forward and rested my elbow on my desk, my fingers pressed against my eyelids, hoping to keep the tears at bay. However, it proved futile because here was my young girl, whom I had helped teach how to walk, talk, create pillow forts, and every other childhood lesson one learns growing up, weeping her eyes out over the telephone. So, what do you want from me after all this time? I want to be your daughter again. I'd like to talk with you like we used to. I'm not sure if it is achievable. You really hurt me. Do you realize how horrible it is to find out that your own children no longer want you? I understand. I can't begin to apologize for this, but I have missed you so much. I go to Papa's every Sunday, hoping you called or left a message for us. But nothing, never a word. That's when I realized how terribly we had fouled up. They keep telling me you don't want to talk to us. But, Daddy, it has been 7 years. I have missed so much of your life, and I do not want to miss any more. And what if your mother's opinion is incorrect? Is she the one who started this mess? Okay, I had to laugh at that. And where was the fire 7 years ago? I was a kid. I didn't have a significant boyfriend at the time, so I didn't see what Mom did. Is there something wrong? Because I had no idea what sex was really like, I could not help myself. I smiled. Neither of us realized what the implications would be if we followed Mom's plan. We just wanted you back. We tried calling after you as you walked away, but you never turned around. If you had, you could have seen how distraught we were. We would have immediately apologized and told you the truth, but you continued walking. How's your brother doing? I inquired, attempting to keep my voice steady. Carson is doing wonderfully. He joined the army to get away from Mom. Did he? Fear rose in my heart at the prospect of my son dying on foreign country far from home. But he stated he was only going to complete 4 years, so he should be done by next year. I could hear the hope in her voice. Dad, did you remarry? Yeah, why? Don't get mad. But I found you through Facebook. It was not my Facebook page. Catalina had created a family page so that her relatives in Mexico could stay updated on how we were doing and how Alondra had grown over the years. I wish I had been there. I bet it was a lovely ceremony. I overheard my daughter sigh. So, Dad, what is my sister's name? Alondra, I declared triumphantly. She looks just gorgeous. I would like to meet her when you are ready. There is no pressure. My daughter's voice was filled with worry that if she pressed the issue, it might be the last time she heard from me. To be honest, I couldn't say anything about the matter. I was conflicted at the moment. Dad, I want you to meet David. He is a good dude. He reminded me of you. Is it okay if we come to see you? We pledge not to impose on you or your new family. I genuinely want to get to know them. I do not know. I'll have to address this with Catalina. I understand. Please, Dad, do not forget about me. Amber, I have never forgotten about you, I admitted. How could I? You are my daughter. I can never forget you. Daddy. I listened to her side before breaking down again. Then I heard a rustling over the line. Mister, would it be okay if we called you back? Amber will need a moment. I looked at the clock and realized it was time to get some laundry from daycare. And now was my day to do so. Catalina and I switch off so that one of us may have a few hours alone before returning home to a boisterous 4-year-old. Do not get me wrong. I adore Alondra, but she has a tendency to overreact at times. However, that is the purpose of maturing, to push one's life to its boundaries. I need to pick up my daughter from daycare. She can make a call in 1 hour, I said, gathering my belongings and closing my briefcase as I rose. I understand. I will let her know. I take out my cell phone. I went through my files on its hard drive and chose the one thing I hadn't accessed in years since it would hurt too much. I felt a tear well up in my eye as I looked at the photo of my 14-year-old daughter. As the pad of my thumb slid down my daughter's face, I filled my screen with thoughts of how my life may have turned out if I had turned around that day in the restaurant. I will not deny it. I missed them so badly. I'm pulling up my wife's phone number and closing the picture. See more. Catalina's beautiful voice pierced my ears as she responded. You'll be surprised to learn who called me right now. I responded in Spanish. We always spoke in Spanish at work so that no one could overhear our talks. Who? My daughter. I overheard her gasp across the telephone. Are you okay? I could hear her worry in her voice. To be honest, I can't say. I admitted as I walked towards the elevator, which would take me down to the 5th floor where the daycare was located. What exactly did she want to tell me? She is getting married, and she wants to meet you and Alondra. I stated while I waited for the cab to arrive. I see. We'll talk about this when I get home. Are you on the way to pick up Alondra? Of course, sweetie, I replied with a smile on my lips. Good. Catalina had a lovely little purr in her voice. She always did when she saw me doing my dad thing with Alondra. I will be home soon. Will tacos be acceptable for dinner? Honey, if you make these, I'll eat 6 of them. I joked, which was correct. I may not enjoy refried beans and a few other Mexican meals, but I adore Catalina's cuisine. When I heard my wife's quiet giggle, I smirked and laid my briefcase down, kneeling on one knee, as my daughter raced towards me, shouting, Daddy! When she spotted me, I held Alondra close to me, her small arms wrapping around my neck, reminding me of Amber doing the same thing when she was Alondra's age. Are you ready to go home? I inquired, and my daughter vehemently shook her head, picking up my 4-year-old in my right arm as I rose, pointing to the man in charge of the children that day. He turned off every other day with his wife as I stood up. Did you have fun today? I inquired as we exited the daycare and walked to the elevator. As I carried Alondra to my car, a warm smile spread across my face as she quickly chatted about her day. Normally, Catalina and I share a car, if Alondra wasn't at daycare. Suppose she was. I wanted to leave early so that I could be ready to pick up Alondra. It was the same for Catalina on her day. Go put your things away, honey, I directed as we entered the 3-bedroom condo Catalina and I had purchased after returning from our honeymoon. The one provided by the company was insufficient to meet our needs following a laundress birth. The sound of my daughter's feet rushing towards her bedroom filled my heart with contentment. I was in our bedroom changing out of my suit when my phone called. Hello? I responded as my t-shirt slipped down my chest. When chasing a 4-year-old, comfy clothing is essential, Dad. My lips shook at hearing my son's voice. Dad, I put Carson on a 3-way call with us. I hope that's okay. He also wanted to talk with you. When I told him I had reached you, how did you acquire my phone number? I inquired as I walked back out to the living room as Alondra was sitting in her little chair at the coffee table with her coloring books and crayons before her, walking into the kitchen getting Alondri's favorite cup that she just had to drink from the cabinet, and pouring her a glass of apple juice before screwing the lid on and inserting a straw through the hole. Place it on top of the lid. It helps to keep spills at a minimal. Should Alondra accidentally knock it over? Here you go, honey. I whispered lovingly, laying a laundromat drink in front of her kind puppy, Alondra, who chirped with that toothy, loving smile. Then another mama blathered in, seeing those cheeks flame like her mother's always did. Dad. Who was that? Carson inquired, perplexed. My daughter. I spoke sincerely as I dropped myself onto the couch. Your baby sister? I informed them as I watched my daughter's head snap up at the poppy. Do I have a brother? Alondra inquired, switching to English as she typically does. I grew used to it, so I just go with it. Do you? As I watched my daughter jump from her seat and race around the table, I nodded and smiled like a sister. She climbed into my lap. Poppy, I'd like to hear too. Alondra talked with doll-like eyes as she looked up at me. Okay, honey. I'm lowering my phone and putting it on speaker. Carson Amber, I'd like you to meet your sister Alondra Hale. Say hello, baby. I encouraged her while rubbing her back. Hola! Alondra exclaimed enthusiastically as she hopped on my leg. English, honey. They don't speak Spanish, I informed her, seeing her nod of understanding. Hello, little sister. I'm your bigger sister. I could hear Amber's trembling voice. Hi, where are you now? Are you here? Are you close? Will you come over? Alondra spoke quickly, as she always did when she was excited. That would be difficult for me, little sister. Carson said, I'm in California right now, but I really want to meet you. I could hear my son straining to control his emotions. Amber informed me you had joined the army. I did. I needed to get away from Mom. Things became worse after you departed. I will inform you later. No, don't. I do not care what happened to her. That's in the past, and I'd prefer leave it there, I replied harshly. Okay, I heard my son sniff. So, Dad, I've heard you got married again. I did. And she is the most amazing woman you will ever meet. I spoke proudly. I hope I can, only if you are fine with it. I realize I said something cruel to you that day. For the past 7 years, I have despised myself for it. Will you forgive me? I believe we all handled that day extremely terribly. I let my emotions get the best of me, but I was extremely hurt. I understand, Dad, and we sincerely apologize for that. But can we strive to rebuild the friendship that we unintentionally destroyed? I know David and would want to be a part of your lives. Amber, sliced in. First, answer my question. I noticed it at Papa's one day while helping them clear out a room. They said they had been waiting to give it to us, but you always said no, which was correct. I told them no. A lot. Amber. I nodded when Alondra looked at me and silently inquired if she had stated it correctly. Where do you live? In Dad's former hometown. I've never left Kansas City. Honey, I will show you later. When Alondra stared at me with confusion, I responded, Poppy, when can I see my brothers and sisters? This caught me off surprise. I did not expect her to ask that. Dad, why is she calling you Poppy? Carson inquired, perplexed. Because she is half Latina, and Poppy signifies father, daddy, depending on the context I provided. Really? Did you marry a Latina woman? My son's voice conveyed incredulity. I did, the best decision I have ever made. Otherwise, I would not have this tiny munchkin. I tickled my daughter and listened to her giggle. Poppy, stop, Alondra replied between giggles of laughter. So we sat there chatting as the minutes passed from 10 to 20 to an hour. Then 2 before Carson had to say farewell and leave for his duty location. It was agreed that Carson may call later when he was off duty. Amber then left after an emotional goodbye to the 2 of us, leaving Alondra kneeling on the couch between my legs and my chin, resting on her left shoulder and leaning against my chest. We took a photo together. We sent it to both of them. My son then texted me his phone number and sent us a picture of himself in his uniform. I have to say, my boy looked good in that. I was quite proud of him. I was apprehensive, but yet incredibly proud of my son. It takes a lot of guts to put your life on the line, regardless of whether he did it solely to avoid his mother. Then came the photo of Amber and David cuddling together. I saw my daughter struggling not to cry in it. How my kid had grown so gorgeous while I was gone. I loathe myself for missing these years with them. But what's done is done. Nothing can change this. All we can do is continue forward, hoping to make up for lost time. Catalina entered that evening at her normal time. It was exactly 5:30. I never have to worry about her sneaking away as the witch did for so many years. She 3 or 4'd herself out? No, not Catalina. I knew her family would disown her if she breached her marital vows. Not that she ever would. That is how much I trust Catalina, compared to the nightmare of 17 years. It's strange how you don't notice the signs until it's too late in history. Mi amore, Tije Renato Catalina murmured as she slid into my lap after cuddling with our daughter. It was her favorite saying when we were apart for an extended period of time. Which means, my darling, I have missed you. I said, I also have a tie, before embracing those lips. I'll never grow tired of kissing. Do you want to talk about today? Catalina whispered in my ear and tenderly rubbed my chest. She could tell how shattered my heart was at that moment. If the inky darkness overtook me, Amor Catalina cooed to our daughter. Why don't you turn on your cartoons while your father and I have a conversation? Okay. Alondra chirped before hurrying to turn on the television. Catalina rose from my lap. That lovely balm of hers brushed against my erection as she took my hand and led me to the kitchen. She enjoys talking while she cooks. Plus, I believe she knows I stare at her bum when she does this. I mean, who wouldn't stare at it? It was divine. So I stood there and watched her make our food for the night. She never let me cook. Says I'm not very good at cooking. Hey, if she wants to cook, I am all for it. It doesn't mean I don't clean up after she does the task. That is what a marriage should be like. A united front, with each person carrying the load equally. That is what I think. Anyway, plus I have to admit that she cooks better than I do. I noticed how she listened closely as I described the chat Alondra and I had with Carson and Amber. He looks so much like you, Catalina cooed gently as I showed her the image of himself Carson had sent me. Don't they look wonderful together? She said something when I showed her the image of David and Amber. So, honey, what would you like to do? She questioned, giving me that look. I know it never set well with her that I and my children were distant, but she never brought it up when I knew it went against her upbringing and her thinking. Family is meant to stick together, no matter who irritates him. Blood is thicker than water, as the proverb goes, and her family believed it, just as they did their faith. I want to see my daughter. I want to see my son. Hell, all I want is to hold them again. When Catalina started smiling, I raised an eyebrow. It's about time, Catalina murmured, putting her arms around me and kissing my lips. I understand that it will take some time for the three of you to regain your footing, but I will be with you. I am your wife, and I would never abandon you, she replied in a loving tone as she looked up at me. So, are you ready to become the mother of 2 more children? When I inquired, Catalina simply nodded vehemently. Catalina came from a huge family, so I knew she wanted more children. We were waiting for Alondra to be accepted into kindergarten before trying again. That way, Catalina would not be encumbered with a 4-year-old underfoot during her pregnancy. Now you call that your daughter? I would like to speak with her and establish a date for their visit. Catalina said this while caressing my chest. Amber, do you use video calling on your phone? I texted her. Dad, I didn't expect you to contact me so fast. No, not on my phone, but my laptop does. Why? Go grab it. Someone wants to talk with you. I responded back, giving her my Skype ID, which I use to communicate with Alondra whenever I have to travel out of town on work. Who? Catalina. Okay, wait on. Do not go anyplace. Of course she's excited. She gets to see her. Poppy, Catalina stated in a loving tone as she caressed my cheek after I showed her Amber's SMS. Relax. It will be okay. She soothed me when she realized how terrified I was to see my daughter after 7 years away when the Skype ringtone played. Dad? Amber exclaimed happily as our lines connected. Hello, honey, I greeted. I couldn't help it. I smiled as I looked at my now 23-year-old daughter. She wasn't the only one struggling not to cry at that point, leaning against the counter close to the stove so that my phone could photograph both of us. Amber, meet Catalina. Catalina, meet Amber, my eldest daughter. I mentioned this when introducing them. Hello, Catalina stated that she exudes warmth instinctively. Hello, Amber spoke with shaking voice. It is okay to cry. This is a wonderful occasion, so if you have to, do not let me stop you, Catalina said in a motherly voice. You must be David. She spoke as we watched Amber, his fiancé, slip down beside her and wrap his arm around her, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she stared at me. I am. It's good to meet both of you. David spoke cordially. I apologize. I promised myself I would not cry anymore today, Amber said, drying her eyes. Amber? That's okay. You should be in tears. It is the natural thing to do. Now I've heard from your father. You'd like to come visit us, Catalina replied, giving me this look. See? So it wasn't so difficult, was it? Yes, we would. Only if it's okay with both of you. We can find. I won't let my stepdaughter sleep in a cheap motel when we have a perfectly good room home, Catalina murmured, severing Amber, forcing her to gasp. My family welcomes everyone, and you are family. I'm sorry it took your father so long to come around, but he can be obstinate. She spoke with a mocking smile. We're talking now. That is what matters, Amber stated. Her eyes shifted between us, and I couldn't help but stare down at my wife's bum as her skirt moved as she grabbed for her spice mixture, which she created for tacos and other dishes. When did you wish to come? Catalina questioned playfully, hitting my arm as she grasped me. Nonetheless, she had a sheepish expression in her eyes as she brushed her hair behind her ear and heat flooded her cheeks. I can't help it. After 5 years together, it still felt like the first date. Her beauty has remained unchanged over the years. Not this weekend, but the next. We are free to fly in for a few. No, Catalina was not having it. You must spend a week with us. How else will we get to know each other? It cannot be done in 2 days, she stated in a motherly tone. When is the wedding? March 16th next year, David supplied. Whom? Does Alondra have anything scheduled for the next 3 weeks? Catalina inquired, knowing full well that I would recall anything from memory. No, there is nothing. Then you fly in on that Saturday and remain until the following Sunday. You are a member of this family and will be joining it soon. You need to meet the rest of your family. Catalina spoke as she stirred the sizzling pork and onion mixture with green peppers. She prefers the heat. I can't stomach that much heat, so she simply adds jalapeno and bell peppers to reduce the spiciness. Dad, are you okay with this? I could tell Amber was worried as she waited for my response. I am. I want to see you, honey. I've missed you so much. I said it honestly, and I missed you too, Amber said, trying not to let her emotions overwhelm her. David, can we? Of course, baby. Do whatever you want. I hate to say that father loves a person when he's dating his daughter, but David seems to be a great guy. We'll just have to request the time. Do you two work together? I asked with an arched brow. We do. I got a job as a pharmacy technician, and David manages the store where I work. I noticed my daughter's adoring expression as she looked at David. Do not chastise them. Remember, we met at work too, Catalina remarked with a sultry little smirk. Did you? Amber inquired, introspect. It's inappropriate to tell this story in front of a toddler, I said, hearing my daughter's feet rush towards us. Mama, can I have some more juice? Alondra asked, raising her glass. Of course, Mia was wiping her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven door handle. Poppy, who are you speaking to? Alondra inquired, looking up at me and my phone. Amber's hands were cupping her mouth as Alondra stepped in front of me. Your sister? I responded, smiling down at my daughter. Really? Alondra gave a high-pitched shriek. She waved ecstatically as she hopped on her feet. Hello, Alondra. It's good to see you, Amber remarked pleasantly. You look stunning. Are you planning to visit? Alondra inquired again very soon. Thank you. You are adorable. Amber nodded. I know. Alondra smiled as she swooned. Alondra, why don't you go back and watch your show while we figure this out? Catalina spoke in a warm, motherly tone as she bent down to deliver Alondra her drink. Bye. Big sister. Alondra waved at my phone before returning to her cartoons. That's what I assumed she was doing, only to have Alondra rush back into the kitchen 10 minutes later with a drawing she had just created. Look, Poppy, she exclaimed eagerly, holding up a picture of 5 badly drawn stick people standing under a blue sun. What do you have there, Carito? I inquired as Catalina turned to look at it as well. A photo of all of us? Alondra spoke boldly. That's you, Mama, my brother and sister. And that's me, Alondra continued, pointing to each figure in the image. But why the blue sun? Because it's pretty. Alondra responded as if it were a rational response, which it very likely was for her. I wouldn't critique my daughter's artwork. That would be unbecoming of me as a father. So shouldn't we put it on the fridge for your sister to see when she arrives? I inquired, and Alondra nodded vehemently. Go ahead. Let your Poppy and I complete our conversation with your sister, Catalina said, ushering Alondra out of the kitchen after she had hung the photo on the fridge door. Okay, dinner is nearly ready. We must say our goodbyes for the time being. It was a pleasure meeting you. I have wanted to, ever since your father informed me about you two, but you know how stubborn your father can be. Amber giggled at what Catalina said. You two have a good night, and please do not hesitate to contact. We will. Bye, Dad. I love you. We'll call when we hear more about our vacation, Amber murmured, placing her fingers to her lips and delicately stroking the screen of her laptop. Now the gorgeous father must arrange the table, Catalina remarked, giving me the expression I knew meant one thing. I was so screwed tonight. God, those tacos were wonderful. I paid for that night by leading Alondra to her bedroom. I looked back at my wife, who sauntered seductively to the bedroom on the opposite side of the condo, watching her reach back and carefully lower the zipper on her skirt, allowing it to cascade down her legs and pull on the floor, revealing that hard apple-shaped bulge. Her black thong separated her bum cheeks. I felt my manhood rouse as I imagined what she would be doing while I read Alondra a bedtime tale, which was the longest 20 minutes of anticipation I'd ever had. Knowing my hot wife was only over the street, getting ready for tonight's event, and smelling the pleasant aroma she always wore as she prepared for our night. Mostly nighttime lovemaking. Sometimes it did not happen. This happens. After all, you're responsible for raising a young child. Sometimes you're just too exhausted to have sex. That's not to say we didn't get each other off. There she stood. When her hands pressed on the door frame of our restroom, my lips instinctively smacked. Our condominium building has a gym on the ground floor, so we can stay active rather than rip muscle out of the bum, but enough definition to recognize that we have them. Well, in Catalina's situation, I still have the hard body I built over 2 years of coming to the gym every day. So, is Maya more prepared for the ride of his life? Catalina questioned in a sexy tone, her brown eyes running down my body as I stripped swiftly. I answered, "Leave me alone, Cielo," watching her eyes narrow as the flames of her passion flared, as my words sank into her ears. "Heaven," Catalina mused as her index finger pressed against the center of my chest as I went backward to the bed, only to have my legs buckle and drop me down its surface. "Have you met?" "You?" I inquired with a cheeky grin. "Definitely Bliss. That's correct." Catalina purred before her lips hungrily tore at mine, her inhalation of breath being audible in my ears as I bit lightly along the side of her neck. "Then let me take you to the 7th heaven," Catalina purred into my ear. "Lead the way," I said, as if I would ever turn down the opportunity to feel the inside of her velvet pocket. I was not that foolish. Her eyes were usually warm and seductive when we were having sex. She told me that only I was on her thoughts, and would always be as she slid from my lap and onto the bed. I observed how her predatory eyes were fixed on me. While she focused in on her prey, you may just enjoy it while this angel transports you to the hereafter. When Alondra was staying at her grandparents' place, she looked up at me with those love-filled eyes that Kirsten had. That method helped me acquire a lot of new vocabulary. But not that night. No. That night it was only the faint murmurs of two people in love saying sweet nothings to each other. Life, as it usually does, moves forward. Carson did call the following day, which I didn't mind. I apologized for not doing so that night, seeing as he forgot it would be 11 p.m. on the East Coast when he got off duty. He did not want to call so late and wake up. Alondra, which I understand. If Alondra is awakened too early from her nap, she finds it difficult to fall back asleep. By the time we hung up the phone, it had been 2 hours and I still hadn't done anything at work. However, as the boss, I could get away with it. After 2 weeks of Alondra asking when her sibling would arrive, I was starting to get annoyed. Well, she is 4 years old, so it sort of came with the territory. So when Amber and David's flight arrived, I kissed my wife and snuck out of our condo early in the morning. Catalina wanted to accompany us. However, waking Alondra up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday was like asking someone to separate the Red Sea. Impossible. I was a nervous wreck the entire journey to Charlotte Douglas Airport, waiting for my daughter's aircraft to arrive. My gaze never left the arrival board as I paced. I observed the TSA agents looking at me. However, they never approached. Then a time occurred. My gaze caught on Amber as she and David made their way through the crowd. I watched the men nod before Amber bolted into Iran and raced towards me. "Dad!" Amber shouted with delight as she ran towards me with outstretched arms. I noticed tears gleaming in the airport lights as they streamed down her face. "Dad?" Her cry was muted since her face was buried in my chest while she embraced me tightly. I admit that I hugged her hard, straight back. After all, it was the first time I'd seen my grown daughter in 7 years. I was not going to let her go. People looked at us. I didn't care. We remained like this for 5 long minutes. I noticed David standing there, patiently watching us. He had to be 6'1" since he was taller than I was. I was 6 feet tall. His dark hair was well trimmed and brushed. It showed me that he cared about the image he projected to the world, rather than the messy hair of her previous girlfriends, I remembered. His clean-shaven face had a bluish tint to it, while his clothing was not formal. They did show that he tried to impress me. "Dad, I'd like for you to meet David," Amber replied, wrapping her arm around her fiancé when she left my arms. "David Callista," he murmured, extending his hand to me. "Nathan." "How?" I greeted him, noting his tight grip. "Dad, where are the other two?" Amber inquired, looking around for Catalina and Alondra. "You know how difficult it is to wake up a 4-year-old at 5 a.m. on a Saturday when cartoons are not involved?" I inquired with a sharp gaze. Catalina remained at home with her. Right. Amber had a shy expression on her face when she said that. "Are these all the bags you have?" I inquired, looking down at the one David was able to hold in one hand thanks to the extra handles of their rolling luggage. "Yes, sir," David said respectfully. "Come on. Is my automobile this way?" I remarked, indicating toward the exit. Halfway to my car. My phone rang from my jeans pocket. "Hello, honey," I responded after viewing my wife's ID. On the screen. "Hello? Me and others. Has their flight arrived yet?" I heard her move around the kitchen across the line. "Yeah, I'm walking to the car right now. We should arrive home in half an hour, depending on traffic," I said, taking out my key fob and listening for the sound of my car unlocking as we approached. "Okay, I'll make breakfast in the coffee. Can Amber eat eggs?" "Yep." "Let me ask David," I murmured, turning back to face those who were following me. "You're not allergic to eggs, right?" "No. Do you love them?" David responded with a toothy smile. "He can eat eggs," I said, knowing what she was planning to do well. "The vegetables will take a while to cook, so we'll be waiting for you 3 to arrive home. Drive safely, baby." I could hear the love in her voice as she chopped the vegetables for her version of a Mexican omelet. "Always, honey," I said, as I pressed the trunk button on my key fob to load ammunition. I could see how crimson those cheeks were. Joe is also thick, yellow. "Dad, when did you learn Spanish?" Amber inquired as David placed their things in the trunk of my car. "After asking Catalina out on our first date, I was honest." Amber's eyes widened when I stated it. "You must have really liked her for doing that." "Yeah, I was completely smitten with her. Just don't tell her," I responded, smiling warmly. "Does she know what you did?" Amber asked as David closed the trunk's lid. "Yes," I replied as I proceeded along the side of the car to the driver's door. "Have you ever done it before?" My gaze was drawn to my daughter, who was about to say the witch's name. I tried everything to make that woman happy. However, that wasn't enough to keep her from giving what she shouldn't to every man she could, I said in a heated tone. "Sorry, Dad, it is just—" "Never mind. Forget I ever mentioned it," Amber replied, shaking her head. "Let us chalk it up to a mental fart. I promised myself not to bring up the past. I'm sorry I couldn't keep it. That's fine, Amber. Just don't bring it up again." I stopped myself from calling her mother a witch, which she was. I promise I won't. I noticed she believed what she said. "So get in. I would rather not miss breakfast," I said, which was correct. "I told you Catalina could cook, and I've never missed one of her meals." "Dad, didn't you get a home?" Amber inquired as we drew into the parking garage of my condominium complex. "Been there, done that. I don't have a lawn to mow or any responsibilities to keep up with here," I said, opening the trunk after shutting off the car. "Furthermore, it is close to work, and I am not planning to buy a home in this city." I pretended to be shocked as I said, "The taxes are outrageous. So, David, you too are looking to buy." When the young man slammed his head against the underside of the trunk lid, I smirked wickedly. "You're not going to tell me that you two are living together out of wedlock?" I asked. I pretended to be a stuck-up prude, but I wasn't. I merely found it entertaining to tease my future son-in-law. What father hasn't done it to his daughter's future husband? Dad bit my lip as the tone I hadn't heard in 7 years left Amber's lips. She used the same tone when I treated the losers she dated as a teenager. However, I cannot argue that David was a loser. A father must guarantee that the man is suitable for his daughter. Don't, David, he is a good dude. Amber had a serious expression on her face as she crossed her arms. It reminded me of the witch when she was enraged. I couldn't help myself. I said, closing my trunk. That's okay, honey. Your father is merely assessing me. I'd do the same, David remarked, nodding at me. The boy is intelligent. Perhaps there is hope for him. I am used to myself. If any of you needs to exercise while here, there is a gym on the ground floor. Not difficult to find. If anyone gives you trouble, simply inform them that you have guests from 1003. I said this as I led them into the building, and they nodded and understood. I was not going to say anything. But you look great, Dad. I don't recall seeing you so slim, Amber observed as we walked towards the elevator. Well, I had 2 children to raise, and going to the gym came in a distant second to making sure you and your brother had everything they needed. I answered by pushing the call button. May I ask Mr. Kami? Nathan, I interrupted. May I ask, Nathan? When you married your new wife, did you research the dominant culture? Did I say something wrong? I saw David stare at my daughter as I scowled. I'm going to say it once, so take this as a caution. Do not. I repeat, don't call them that. They loathe that word. It's analogous to calling a black guy or woman the N-word. It is either Latino or Latina. There's nothing else. Understood. I stated strongly that I meant no offense. David exclaimed, I know, but it's better that I tell you this now than you say it in front of Catalina or her family. You wouldn't get out alive. That word offends them greatly. They believe the white man is attempting to eliminate their culture because individuals today want to impose their beliefs on a group of people who understand who they are. I remarked, mimicking Catalina's outburst to her cousin while we were dating, because a couple people kept calling her that at work. Could they not tell she loathed that word? Some folks are simply fools, I suppose. I understand. No wonder Pablo always gives me the stink look. David whispered behind me as I got into the elevator. Catalina and Alondra can understand and speak English. If the 2 of you do not speak Spanish, do not try. I said. I saw nods in the elevator door's reflection as I punched the floor button for my condo the instant I stepped into the home I shared with Catalina. My smile lightened up as I saw my wife and daughter, still in their PJs, waiting for me to return with my traditional kiss and Alondra's grip around my legs. I took a step back to let the 2 people who had been the most important people in my life for the past 5 years look at my adult daughter and her fiancé, Amber David. I'd like you to officially meet my wife, Catalina, and squeeze her into me and my daughter. Your sister? Alondra? I remarked, watching my eldest daughter lower down to her knees and extend her arms to Alondra. Hello, baby sister. I am really glad to see you, my daughter whispered as she clutched and gently rocked Alondra. Hello, Mrs. Howell, David said, extending his hand to Catalina. Catalina, please. A family should not rely on formality, Catalina said. I noticed David was taken aback when Catalina hugged him. Nat, why don't you show them to their room and I'll make the omelets? I hope you are both hungry because you will not be after breakfast. I remarked, bringing the 2 of them to our guest bedroom, Alondra racing ahead of me. What are you doing now, you little goof? I inquired in a playful tone as Alondra danced in front of the audience. Nothing. Alondra responded with her signature toothy smile. When you've finished unpacking, there's coffee in the kitchen if you want some. I said this while standing in the doorway with Alondra alongside me and holding my hand. We will. We skipped breakfast to reach our flight on time, Amber explained, placing her suitcase on the bed. Good, because Catalina enjoys preparing enormous dinners. Reminds her of her childhood. We'll let you 2 get situated. Come on, honey. Let's let them some solitude. I spoke softly, touching Landry's hand. See, Papi? Alondra said, looking up at me. He appears pleasant, Catalina stated casually as I walked into the kitchen and Alondra went to observe her. My little pony. He is a very polite fellow, I said as I gathered mugs for all of us. It smells great in here, Amber murmured from behind us. I'd have guessed they'd unpacked. Couldn't wait for the coffee. I don't want to pass out before breakfast, she murmured, as if she could read my mind. Catalina expressed gratitude and satisfaction in her culinary abilities. As I placed the fresh cup in front of her, I noticed her eyes light up. Creamer is in the fridge, or there is milk, and here's the sugar. I began pushing the small dish that Catalina keeps it in for guests, in case they do enjoy a good cup of coffee. Thank you, Dad. This is exactly what the doctor prescribed. Amber moaned as she smelled the scent of coffee. I noticed how she mouthed a thank you to Catalina, who nodded back as she laid the creamer down. Before my daughter, who spent no time getting her coffee exactly how she liked it. Amber groaned into her cup. Thank you. My cousin runs a coffee estate in the mountains of Mexico. He sends us a few of bags each month. Knowing how much your father loves coffee, as do I. But my cousin really likes your father. Catalina gave me a knowing smirk. It was not that the man liked me. Okay, he did. But that's only because I saved his business from failure, when a disease devastated his harvest 2 years ago. Hey, I didn't complain. I am a silent owner of a coffee farm, and I receive free coffee. So I consider that a win-win situation, does he? Amber gave me a peek. Yes, your father is a very nice man, Catalina added, giving me a cheeky look as she rolled the omelet up after covering the middle with caramelized onions and roasted peppers. She removed the seeds to reduce the heat and the roasted tomatoes before plating it, watching her make a much smaller one for Alondra. We both knew Alondra wouldn't finish it if given a full-sized one. I couldn't help it. My gaze shifts away as Catalina bends down, allowing her pajama bottoms to tighten around her bum as she removes the terrible signs from the oven. What shall I say? I enjoy ogling my wife's figure. That, I believe, explains why she behaves in such ways. My eyes snapped up as David walked down the hall. I believe he took over unpacking so Amber could converse with us over coffee. Now, Net, make yourself useful by carrying these to the table. Catalina teased me as she held out 2 platters. Alondra, come to the table. I spoke in a fatherly tone, seeing my daughter transfixed to the television. Si, papi, Alondra said, sliding off the couch and hurrying over to where she normally sat. Gracious, papi, she replied, looking up at me with that lovely smile, when I set chocolate milk in front of her. You are welcome, honey. I mumbled into her hair and kissed the top of her head. I noticed how Alondra nodded vehemently when Amber asked if she may seat next to her. This is very good. Amber groaned from behind her cupped hands. I hope it's not too hot for you. Your father dislikes excessive heat. Catalina spoke in a motherly tone as she looked across the table at my eldest daughter. No, moving her head gives it a little extra kick. Amber stated it politely. I would not mind a little. Thank you, David replied with a smile. Catalina presented him with a bottle of Luca Taco Label reserved chili habanero hot sauce that she had bought from Mexico. It's hot, so use sparingly. I was raised with it, therefore I am used to it. Thank you. David remarked this while removing the bottle from her. I observed David taste test it on a small portion of his omelet. You okay? Catalina inquired, massaging David's back as I saw the heat get to him. Never better. What is it named again? I assumed he was angry as he added extra to his omelet. Could Taco Black Label reserve chili and habanero hot sauce? Catalina stated matter-of-factly. I ordered it from Mexico. It isn't the hottest sauce out there, but it's certainly spicy. Do you like it? Yeah. David said, better than Tabasco sauce with a knot. Good. Then you'll love our family. Get together. They bring their own. Catalina spoke with a fairly pleasant smile on her lips. We're heading to Asheville tomorrow. Would you like to go to the zoo together? I inquired, noticing Alondra getting thrilled in her seat at the thought. Only if we won't bother you 3, Amber said, looking around the table at us. Amber dabbed her lips. You are not an inconvenience to us or your family. So don't think that, Catalina urged in her motherly voice. As I previously stated, she comes from a huge family, and I knew she would be uncomfortable with just the 3 of us in the house. Don't get me wrong, she adored us. But I knew she wanted more. All week, I could see how happy she was to have a full house. So, how did you 2 meet? Catalina questioned, sliding her legs beneath her as she sipped her morning coffee from her chair on our terrace. David was already working at the shop when I was appointed as the pharmacy's assistant manager, Amber explained, sitting across from us at the little round table we had set up for such occasions while Alondra watched cartoons. You worked your way up the ladder, I said. David nodded. I respect that of a man. What are your future plans? I believe that in a few years after I have gained more experience, I will try for a more corporate position in the company, David remarked, nodding in agreement with my idea. Do they have a program to help you prepare for such a position? Catalina inquired, sliding her hand into my lap and squeezing my thigh. Yes, they do, but I want to be sure they won't turn me down. That's why I'm going to wait a few more years, David explained before taking a sip of his coffee. That sounds reasonable. I agreed, knowing that if he was a manager in my bank's region, I too would hunt for someone with more branch management experience before considering elevating them to the corporate ladder. So, tell me how you two met, Amber asked. Her gaze flickered between them. Catalina and myself. We glanced at each other. Our eyes met, silently questioning who would tell that narrative. In the end, I believed Catalina telling it would be funnier than me telling it. So we have to go back to when your father first moved here. At the time, I was engaged to someone else, but he was unfaithful. David nodded in agreement as Catalina's fingers never left my thigh. Nonetheless, I always observed your father wandering about the premises with this sort of look. Someone pushed a pine cone up his keister. Amber giggled as Catalina spoke, and David chuckled lightly. I mean, he is a lovely man, but I am engaged and do not wander. I noticed Amber's head dropping at that, so for the course of his 2 years here, that face never left him. So when I stepped into his office that day, I'd been single for a few months. I told your father to get whatever was up his bum out. And who knew he was laughing? She taunted me, as I deserved. I was in a hole during those years. Then we developed a friendship. I knew he wanted more, but he remained patient. Me? After 3 months, we had our first date, and things progressed from there. And I've never looked back. Catalina stated this with love in her eyes as she gazed at me. So, if you two weren't too exhausted, I figured we'd spend the day exploring the city, getting you acquainted to the layout, and then come back and I'd cook us a lovely large dinner, Catalina said. I could tell she was eager to make them both feel welcome. Have you never been to the beach? I responded, observing the look in my daughter's eyes when she realized we had the week off. How about we go down to Roberto's place if he allows us to use it for a few days? I spoke, looking over at my wife, knowing the space was large enough to accommodate all of us. Are you sure, honey? They've arrived, and it's easier to go to the beach here than in Kansas City. I stated clearly, I'm fine with it. I know Alondra will be happy to go, but you'll have to speak with Roberto. Catalina stated this while glancing at me. I understand. I nodded. Seeing as that was my idea, Roberto was the type of man who treated you with more respect. If the person who came up with the idea was the one to ask, or that's what I've learned from the man over the years. I'll go make the call, I responded, rising from my seat. The noises of the city below us faded away as I pushed the glass sliding door shut. Are you enjoying the show, Munchkin? Melanda is a hunter. Walking out of Catalina's in my bedroom with my phone after it had charged my thumb, I kept my gaze fixed on the TV as the names of people I'd met and grown close to since moving to Charlotte flew by as I approached Roberto's contact information. Best wishes, Nathan. Roberto's heavily accented voice crossed the line. Good morning, Roberto, I greeted. He didn't mind if I talked English instead of Spanish because he knew I could handle both. I was hoping you could do me a favor. When he shifted to English, the left corner of my lips raised. All of Catalina's family spoke English. They merely pretended they didn't notice when someone made a bomb out of themselves in front of their family. I saw it several times as a passing salesman attempted to peddle off his items without outright insulting their intelligence. But you understood exactly what the man was doing. It was always funny when the ladies joined in. The teenagers would then simply watch as the person scurried back to their car. Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't mind if Catalina and I utilized your home for a Canadian hole, I said, seeing my daughter whip around in her seat and knowing exactly what that meant. I pretended I couldn't see the glee on her face when I said that. Of course you can. Amigo. What is the unique occasion? He had a purpose for asking. Given that we generally spent our vacations in the mountains, much cheaper on the money and fewer people around. We normally went to the beach when the entire family went down the Canadian hole. My eldest daughter traveled here with her fiancé, and she had never seen the ocean. I told the truth. The entire family was aware of our estrangement but understood why I moved away. There is no loss of desire with a sonogram. until Proximo finishes the semana. See? I responded when he inquired whether I was bringing them over the next weekend. In the background, I heard my sister-in-law wonder what was making him so thrilled. That's when I heard her enthusiastic voice. He told her something I already knew. I heard her speak quickly in Spanish before her voice faded, knowing that in less than 10 minutes the entire family would know. Would you like me to bring the keys over? Nah, we'll pick them up while we tour the city, say about 1. I spoke. I'm still ignoring my daughter's antics as she bounces on the couch. Ciro has a game today, so I'll leave them. I nodded as he told me about the hidden hiding area. He generally had a spare house. Can you let Ciro know who I'll be supporting for? I expect 5 home runs. I heard my brother-in-law chuckle across the line. I knew Ciro had the potential to become a professional. He was just so good. I wish him the best of luck. I will. I hope she likes the beach. As do I. I said this before we stopped the call. Poppy, will we go to the beach? Alondra inquired with bated breath. Yes, we are, I said, pocketing my phone and smiling at my daughter's antics as she bounced on her knees while I was thinking, we'll go on Monday and enjoy the beach until Thursday. Is this acceptable with you, Princess? Amused. I couldn't help but smile as Landry nodded vehemently. Now behave as you continue to enjoy the show. I whispered this before stepping back out onto the balcony, feeling Catalina's fingers on my back as I sank back into my seat. Hours later, we found ourselves cruising the streets of Charlotte. Alondra sat in the back seat between David and Amber, pointing out locations she liked to visit, particularly the Discovery. It was a little pricey, but it was worth it. It was a highly educational location, particularly for a 4-year-old's thinking. When lunchtime arrived, we stopped at a renowned downtown sit-down restaurant, where I saw my 2 children simply chat away. I saw that my wife had a fairly contented expression on her face as she watched my 2 children from across the table. David and I had a nice talk about his 401. While I wasn't a stock trader, I knew my way around them, so I gave him some advice on who and what I invested in with my own money. 401k. I noticed how attentively he was listening to every word. It indicated that he was scheming ahead of time, and I hope the 2 of them did not end up like the witch and me. I have to admit that David was a charming chap. Just don't tell him what I said. I have to keep the father-in-law vibe going. However, I was pleased that Amber had found a partner who appeared to be a genuinely wonderful guy. After lunch, we went to Roberto's apartment. When we arrived at David and Amber's house and Rita's, I could see their perplexed expressions. I told them to wait in the car before immediately getting out and driving to the location. Roberto had informed me he'd leave his house keys at Canadian Hall. It did not take me long to find it. The keys jingle in my grasp, and warmth spreads through my heart. I read Roberto and Catalina's sister's note, which they had left with them. I could speak Spanish but not read it, so they wrote in English. Their words impacted me deeply. Since I began seeing Catalina, her sister has sized me up and warned me not to injure her sister, or I would have to deal with her and Roberto. However, during the months of our whirlwind romance, I learned to like her and my brother-in-law. They were the first to help. If Catalina became overwhelmed when caring for Alondra when she was first born. Not that I blame Catalina. Having your first child is nerve-wracking. I know Catalina went to bed every now and then, worrying about whether she would be a decent mother and so on. So I mobilized the troops and escorted my wife away. When those days came, she realized she was a very excellent mother. As darkness fell on Charlotte, my tiny family gathered in the living room to enjoy some family time watching a movie. Whatever you do is fine as long as you do it together. Amber and David were dozing off while I was doing laundry. I couldn't blame. They have been up since the early hours of the morning to catch their flight. Catalina flashed me a glance that I mistook for "go to your father." I can't deny that I was watching her rear as she carried Alondra to her room. "Amber," I said softly, shaking her father. My memory went back to when she was a little kid and would mutter in that sleepy tone. "Let's get you 2 into bed," I said, noticing her eyes looking at me through the crack in her lids. "I'm sorry I did." When David rose from his seat, I waved him off. "This happens. Do not worry about it," I said carelessly. Amber wrapped her arm around me as soon as she stood up. Amber mumbled against my chest. "I have missed this for 7 years." "Good night, Dad," she replied before kissing my left cheek and sliding her arm around David's waist. I was laying in bed, waiting for Catalina to walk in, which she did after 15 minutes, which was rapid for Alondra. It told me Alondra was exhausted. When I watched my wife's sexy smile as she strolled down the bedside to our bathroom, I felt myself harden. Her eyes saw the movement of the blankets, which accentuated her sexy smile. I bit my lip at how delicious her smooth body felt after she crawled beneath the sheets. My amour should not go to bed with a hard-on. Catalina cooed to me in a wicked tone. We had sex, and I slept like a baby afterwards. Won't you? But all too soon. Strange how that is. At 5 a.m., our alarm went off. That meant I had to get some washing done so we could hit the road for the 3-hour trek to Asheville. Catalina was like a paparazzi, taking so many shots of me that day. I'm with Alondra, she's with her sister, Amber's with David, etc. I was pleasantly impressed. Amber and Catalina got along as they discussed their wedding preparations and venues. David was very attentive to Alondra, constantly accompanying her when she wanted to show him something she particularly enjoyed. As usual, I was the cautious father, as was David, which I enjoyed. You never know these days, and the globe has some ill people. We had lunch in the zoo, then we roamed the grounds. Before, we were all exhausted and had sore legs. By the end, I was carrying laundry on my shoulders. Not that I minded. I realized quickly, way too soon, she would not need me as much. As sad as it was, that's life. Nothing remains the same forever. Halfway home, I found Alondra dozing on Amber's lap. I noticed how Amber shot me, this smile in the rearview mirror. "Honey, would you mind if we ordered in tonight?" Catalina asked, tiredly. "No. You two ready for pizza?" I asked, gazing over at Amber and David. "I wouldn't mind a slice." "You?" David spoke, looking over at Amber, who shook her head, supreme. "Is everything all right with you?" I inquired, knowing Alondra would not eat anything else. Catalina enjoyed it as well. I do not, but I was usually overruled on the subject. "No, David is allergic to olives," Amber explained, placing her right palm on David's chest. "So how about a tiny supreme for them and a small meat lovers for us?" I responded with a smile. "That is something I can get behind." David nodded, eliciting an eye roll from Catalina. "You have the pizzas requested. I'll get the washing ready for tomorrow," Catalina replied, flashing me her beautiful smile as she and Alondra strolled hand in hand to her bedroom. "Dad, you are aware that we exist. Do you know what would happen if I reneged on the beach?" After placing my order, I questioned with a sharp look. "Are you trying to kill your father?" I was joking, but Alondra would throw a tantrum for weeks over it. "I really don't want you to go through too much bother for us." "That's fine, Amber. In addition, I promised you when you were younger that I would take you there, and I prefer to keep my word." I commented that Amber, like me, remembered that conversation when she was 10. "So, Nathan, when were you going to go out?" David inquired, following me into the living room. "Say it's 7 a.m. Roberto's house is a 6-hour trip away. A Canadian hole?" "Yes, that's the name of the beach," I stated, noting their bewildered expressions. "We will stay till Thursday so that you two can enjoy yourselves. It's a really beautiful sight, honey. What time is it?" Catalina cried out to me from the laundry room. 7:20, I yelled back. "Is there anything going on?" Amber inquired, perplexed. "A football game is underway." I said, which was correct. A game did begin soon. Given the late spring soccer season, I noticed David racking his head to see if there was a football game on. I clarified, noting how David wanted to smack his forehead for not realizing I didn't know you enjoyed soccer. Amber said, putting her legs beneath her and snuggling against David on the love seat. "I could take or leave it. Catalina and Alondra enjoy the games. I just get accustomed to them," I said offhandedly. "Her family is huge supporters of the sport. They throw a big party for me when the World Cup is on, just as they do for the Super Bowl, because that's what family does. Compromise with one another. I know we're about to get down to it." My gaze shifted to Catalina as she and Alondra stepped in, talking on her phone before moving to something I knew she only did in private. Alondra smiled as she hurried into the living room and got onto the sofa, settling into her position and waiting for the game to begin. She turned on the TV and switched the channel to ESPN3 for the game between Mexico and Brazil. Don't tell Catalina, but I was pulling for Brazil. She takes football soccer almost as seriously as Americans do football. When there was a knock at Catalina's condo door, I patted her leg. I knew it had to be the pizzazz. Her attention was completely focused on the game, as Mexico was leading during the first half of the first session. Personally, I found soccer dull, and I know she felt the same way about football. As good husband and wife, we set that aside and focused on the time we spent together. Before accepting the pizzas from the teenage kid, I pay him and leave a generous tip. Pizza is arrived. I yelled out to them as I brought them into the kitchen and prepared enough plates. Amber and David walked into the kitchen, but Alondra and Catalina remained glued to their chairs. I know Alondra did this because she wanted to be like her mother. Make yourself a dish. I gestured, bringing their plates to them. Thank you, honey. Can you bring me some beer? Catalina asked, kissing my cheek. Sure, babe. I mocked my daughter about Kool-Aid for you. Are they not going to join us? Amber asked Loa when I sat down with my dish. Nah, not with Mexico in the lead. They won't leave that area. I stated this before I took a bite. God, I missed the meat lover's pizza. This is good, David murmured as he inhaled his slice. I understand. Best pizza place in town, I stated, savoring the meaty toppings, knowing it would be a while before I had another meat lover's pizza. See? But they're la pelota, Catalina yelled as she jumped from her seat, holding her plate in one hand and her beer in the other, with Alondra imitating her mother. No, asshole, how can this be? Captain the ball. She lamented that one of Brazil's forwards nicked the ball before Mexico could score. Alondra, language. I chastised Alondra for going a bit too far and mimicking for a 4-year-old, casting a glance at my wife. She averted her gaze in embarrassment, knowing she let her words lead her thinking far too often while watching a game. With our stomachs full of delicious pizza and a few beers, I took Alondra to bed at her usual time. I was surprised to see David get into the game near the conclusion when we said our goodnights. We 4 separated for our respective rooms. Catalina was up at 5:30 the next morning preparing breakfast for all of us. I knew she was excited about the prospect. I knew if Carson was present, she wouldn't know what to do. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her neck as she flipped the pancakes on the flat skillet, feeling her lean back against me as we savored the solitude. Net? Catalina gave a gasp. What were your thoughts? I was not going. You must be insane to think I'd keep my hands to myself with my gorgeous wife in my arms, I answered, noticing Catalina blushing fiercely. You'd better not. I overheard her modest murmur. That did bring a grin to my face. Why shouldn't it? After all, I have a beautiful wife, a hyperactive daughter, and a grown daughter who is set to embark on her own journey into marriage. Life was good at that point. Wake up, Munchkin. Pancakes are almost ready, I said, waking my daughter from her sleep. We do not want to miss the beach, do we? I whispered, as Alondra rolled over to sleep again. Biting my lip seems to shock her awake. I knocked on the guest bedroom door and opened it gently. We are awake. Just allow us a few minutes to get dressed. I could hear David's voice through the gap. Okay, just checking. Breakfast should be finished soon. I said this before easing the door shut. Thank you, Dad, Amber stated as I offered her and David their morning coffee. Honey, get the orange juice out and place it on the table, Catalina instructed as she piled the last of the flapjacks on the stack she had constructed, setting the juice and a laundry morning cup of chocolate milk on the table. I returned to help prepare the table and assist my wife in carrying the food. I could not stop smiling. Amber was in the kitchen helping Catalina just as I was preparing to do with David's assistance. Dad, don't simply stand there gawking. Grab the plates, Amber teased. She carried the plate of flapjacks to the table while David handled the 2 plates of sausage. One for breakfast, a spicier sausage combination. I spotted my wife's smirk as she took the syrup from the cabinet. I obtained the plates for all of us. As I walked back to the table, I noticed how Catalina moved around it, as if Amber and David were her own children, and how Amber responded to that. It made me worry what actually occurred to my children when they were in their mother's care. As much as I don't want to know anything about that woman, I suppose I'll have to bite my tongue to find out why we were out of the condo by 6:45 with the dishes done. The car was full. We set out for the sandy sands of Canadian Hole. Mama? My head glanced over the trunk of my car as that word came from Amber, not Alondra. I noticed Catalina was a bit astonished to buy it. But her surprise rapidly converted to happiness, which filled her eyes. "Would you show me around?" Had no idea what Amber was so anxious about. "Certainly," Catalina replied, extending her right arm to Amber. "Do you mind unloading the car, boys? We can manage it, right?" I inquired, gazing over at David, who nodded. "Come, Alondra, let us show your sister the water." Catalina spoke in her pleasant, caring voice, with a laundress, happy cheerfulness permeating the air. "Did anything happen between Amber and her mother?" I stopped myself from seeing what I usually name that woman. David was thinking about something as we emptied the bags, and I could see it in his eyes. "I think Amber should inform you." I noticed how he looked down as I grabbed his left arm. "Did that damage my little girl?" I asked with a forceful tone. "Emotional. Nothing physical. At least that is what she told me. Still does today. Not when I'm around, however. She knows I will not tolerate that in my home." I kicked her rear a few times after hearing that. "I believe you will do well," I said, releasing my grip on his arm. "I won't say anything to Amber about it." I showed him where he and Amber could stay on the other side of the house so they could have some privacy to do what engaged couples do without worrying about having a Land Rover here. With the bags in their correct rooms, the two of us headed out to join the girls. "I promised you I'd get you here someday, didn't I?" I talked from behind them as Catalina and Amber stood there staring out at the white-capped waves, and Alondra went along the beach, seeking for shells like she usually does. I wasn't expecting my daughter to wrap her arms around me like that. "Thank you, it's quite gorgeous." Her murmur was warm against my neck as I held her and softly caressed her back. "You and I need to discuss later. It's just us," I whispered softly into her ear, feeling her nod against my shoulder as she slipped from my arms and into David's. "Did you ever go to the beach?" I questioned the man in my daughter's life. "No. This is my first time as well. My parents were destitute. Not that they didn't work, but they were impoverished, so something like that." David stated that it was always a fantasy for us growing up. However, his gaze was not on me. No, they were out in the huge expanse of blue before us. I can understand that. Amber's childhood was fraught with financial constraints. I was like, "You worked my way up while attending night school so that my family could have a better life," I said, feeling Catalina's fingers slip into mine as she approached my side. Amber took hold of my free hand, as she had done so many times as a child. Later that night, after putting Alondra to bed, Catalina kept David amused. I led Amber out onto the back deck of Roberto's beach house. I knew I was going to despise what I was about to hear. What parent wants to hear that their child was abused? But I had to do it. I needed to know what she'd done to my children. "Okay, Amber. I know I told your brother I didn't want to hear about what occurred after I left, but I believe I need to." I murmured this as the sound of waves breaking on the beach filled the air. "Are you sure?" She lowered her sight. This was not like my daughter, not the daughter I knew. I placed my hand on her right arm, drawing her attention to me. "Yes, absolutely, I am sure." Amber recognized the gravity of my words as she stared into my eyes. At the end of her story, I wanted to slay the witch, but I couldn't right then, so I hugged my kid as close as I could while she screamed against my chest. The 3 or 4 couldn't accept responsibility for her own terrible deeds, which wrecked our marriage, so she blamed our children. She wrangled children into her strategy to persuade me to stay with those 3 or 4. If that wasn't bad enough, she tried to get her to entertain one of her male friends she had on the side while married to that jerk. I pondered why my parents hadn't told me this, unless they didn't know. I knew my father would have gone crazy, and my mother would have whacked those 3 or 4 with a rolling pin. "I'm very sorry, baby," I whispered in her hair. "I am sorry about it." "No, Dad, you were injured. You had every right to believe we did not want you. I do not blame you. You're here now. That is what matters. I knew one thing. My kids were not going to deal with that woman again. Not if I had anything to say about it. Is everything okay?" Catalina huffed when Amber hugged her suddenly. Her eyes met mine, and I knew she was trembling just as much as I was. I believe Catalina understood something had occurred to their mother that caused Amber to take such an interest in her. Not that she ever mentioned it to me. Well, not at that time. "Sure. It'll be fine," Catalina cooed in her motherly voice as she consoled Amber. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up and something to ease your worries," she added, guiding Amber inside the house while giving me that look. She wanted to know everything. I was venting my frustration by beating an old 2x4 against a post, so I didn't vent it on anyone else, given that I am currently unable to grasp Nick. So beating the crap out of that post would have to suffice. I assume Amber informed you that David's voice filled the air as my chest heaved from my excursion of pounding the daylights out of that pole. Yeah, I replied, tossing the plank into the sand. I want you to know that I would never treat Amber like that. David spoke as he walked down the steps to the shore. You better not, I quipped. I don't think my wife would enjoy visiting me in prison. David smiled and remarked, duly noted. She's not helping to pay for the wedding, is she? I inquired, gazing over at David as he joined my side. God, no. She thinks we are making a mistake by getting married. She wants Amber to be single so that she can entice men in. As he spat in wrath, I grew to like him. Good. If you need assistance, please contact us and we will assist you in any way we can, I replied strongly. Do you really mean that? David inquired with a puzzled expression. I nodded. I know how much a wedding costs since I went through it myself, I said, making a shot at myself. I understand that venues and other expenses are costly, and I understand how difficult it is to begin your adult life when you are still setting the groundwork. So I understand that money might be tight for you and Amber as you plan this all out. If we could help, please do not hesitate to call us. We'll set something up, I replied in a fatherly tone as I turned to the man and extended my hand to him. I will. You've got my word, Nathan. David said this with a hard handshake. Did your father teach you the handshake? I asked, seeing him. Not good. A father should teach this to his son. What are you two doing out here? Catalina asked from the top of the stairs. Do you know about gay things? I replied, beaming up at her. I did not need to see it. I knew there would be an eye roll at that. Well, it is getting late. Catalina suggested that you two come in for the night. However, I could tell from the way she stood that she wanted to talk, saying goodnight to David before he headed back up the stairs, hearing him say the same thing to Catalina as he passed her. Catalina knew me well enough to know. While I may not show it on the outside, I was furious with my ex-wife. Sure, more. This rage is bad for you. She's no longer under her mother's thumb. Catalina cooed softly, running her hands up my chest. She told you to do this. Catalina just nodded. I don't blame you for leaving that woman, although I wish you had brought the kids with you. Then I could become a mother of 3. Catalina teased 3 people, but not 4. I'm amused, twitching my brows. I do not know. Do you think you have what it takes to knock me up again? Catalina asked in a demanding tone. You're serious, right? I do, I stated strongly. Then I should stop taking my medicines. Catalina spoke with a seductive smile. The next 3 days were a blur of joy. As we drove Amber and David around the island, we ate some delicious fish. I met several extremely nice folks. However, I had to hold Catalina back when a person Amber's age approached and accused me of racism and other things. I did not take it seriously. Who would want to pierce the nose of someone with multicolored hair? Whack job approaches you and screams, "We're stealing Latinx culture." I knew if the kid came to my corporate office searching for work, she wouldn't get through the door. Her appearance was not professional, and in my area of business, one must appear professional. Otherwise, no one will trust you with their money. I don't think the woman noticed the punch coming until it was too late. And the woman on her ass is staring confusedly at Catalina as she speaks Spanish. I will not get into what she said. Let's just say I learnt a lot more curse words that day than I did on Alondra's visits to her grandparents. I was grateful that David had the wherewithal to cover a laundress for years. Maybe next time you shouldn't cast people you don't know and get in their faces over things you don't understand. Then you wouldn't be on your bony bum if you couldn't grasp what my wife said to you. Now I recommend a new dye job and a fresh perspective on life, if you want to succeed in this world. I mentioned before leading my family away. It made me wonder what the world would be like if there were more people like that going about. I just hope I'm already dead by then. Even that minor blip on our radar couldn't ruin our experience there. But it was too soon to leave. After washing the bedding and putting them back into the closet, Roberto never wanted sheets on his mattresses. I knew the house would be in use for a while. Because the family did not arrive here until 2 weeks before the start of the new school year, the kids would have something exciting to look back on when they started a new class with all fresh faces. Amber and David helped keep the house as nice as we found it. I locked up the house, knowing we wouldn't be back in Charlotte until late that night. Thank you, Dad. Amber hugged me as we entered my unit, saying, "The beach was just perfect." "You're welcome, honey," I replied, patting her back. "It may have taken a while, but I honor my promises." Catalina muttered, "I'm going to put the laundry to bed," before kissing my right cheek and bringing our napping daughter to her room. Amber and David soon followed suit, retiring for the night. Like I was ready to do as I took Catalina's bag into our bedroom, the instant she moved that body next to mine. As I turned out the light, everything appeared to be in order. The monthly family gathering was a hoot. Amber and David were met with welcoming arms. Catalina's mother and father were very interested in Amber. It wasn't particularly surprising. After all, Amber was their step-grandchild, and they were a very family-oriented child. I kept my ears open for any comments concerning the two of them. I know Catalina did the same. I even observed her confront one of the kids after he said something vulgar about my daughter. If I had heard it, it would not have been merely a tongue lashing. The boy was 18, if he could say so. He could withstand the thrashing that followed, and the boy knew it as well. However, I had to intervene and save David before he burned his tongue to a cinder when preparing to consume chili. I know it had ghost peppers. David might enjoy the heat, but he wasn't suicidal, prompting a round of good-natured chuckles from the others before they offered him a cup of chili with the heat he could manage. Like all wonderful things, it came to an end far sooner than I had hoped. I hadn't spoken to my boy in a week since he was doing some form of training that he couldn't tell me about. I hoped Carson was doing well with whatever the Army had him doing. Amber hugged Catalina tightly as we said our goodbyes at the airport, as if she was going to miss her stepmother terribly. However, Catalina was most likely Amber's only motherly figure in 7 years, aside from her grandmother. I saw Alondra hold back tears while my 2 children hugged for an equal amount of time. "You two have a safe flight. Call us as soon as you land." I said this while bringing David into a one-arm embrace, which astonished him. "What shall I say?" The man grew on me. "We will," David responded with Amber, nodding along. "Do not forget what I told you. If you need assistance with the wedding, we're only a phone call away." Catalina nodded as I stated. "Does this mean you'll accompany me down the aisle?" Amber asked with hope in her eyes. "I would not miss it," I remarked with a fatherly smile, prompting my daughter to hug me tightly. "And you can call whenever you need to discuss." "I'm always willing to listen," Catalina remarked in a motherly, sympathetic tone. "I will. Thank you," Amber whispered as she clutched Catalina again. "There's no need for thanks. I am your stepmother. I want you to feel comfortable talking to me about anything that is bothering you, and I know Alondra will want to talk to her older sister. I saw Catalina rock Amber, just as she would with Alondra when she knew she was upset about anything, picking up Alondra and waving goodbye to her sister over the mass of bodies. I struggled to hold back tears as my daughter's form vanished among that bunch. Nonetheless, I knew we were finally chatting again, making up for lost time. In my grief, I stupidly assumed that there would always be another time. There would be nothing anyone could do to prevent me from seeing my daughter. The months passed, and my children's friendship grew stronger with each day. Amber and I spoke practically daily. David even called for banking advice, which I was happy to provide. Carson called as frequently as he could when he wasn't on duty or training elsewhere. I know they chatted a lot to Catalina, which pleased her to death. I knew the wedding planning was stressful for Amber, and I knew Catalina had to calm her down a few times. When summer ended, Alondra began kindergarten. I was both proud and grieved that my little girl was growing up so quickly. Catalina remained on birth control, explaining that she did not want to be pregnant when it was time to fly out for their wedding, which I understood. By then, I knew she and Amber had built a strong bond, which she didn't have with her mother. If I am honest, that was a blessing. I knew it irritated the witch. As Thanksgiving arrived, I realized Carson would be unable to fly back to Kansas City, which grieved me even more. He agreed to fly to Charlotte around Christmas. He intended to preserve enough leave time to attend Amber's wedding before he was discharged that summer. Not to criticize anyone in the military. I was relieved to hear that I am not denigrating anyone who takes the oath. I would never do that. That would be dishonorable. And I like to consider myself an honorable man. It's simply that certain nights while Carson was off training for whatever reason, I laid in my bed worrying about my son's safety. I believe many servicemen realize this because they have children in whatever branch they join. "Hey, Mom," I said into my phone as we went through the airport to catch our trip to Kansas City to join my parents, David and Amber, and his folks for Thanksgiving. "No, we have not boarded yet. The flight does not leave for another 2 hours. I was phoning to let you know that we are at the airport and should be on our way soon. I'm handing Alondra my phone. She was very thrilled to speak with her granny. They try to get out as often as possible to see us. Not that they would ever need to purchase an airline ticket. I handled it. They just didn't travel much for their age." As we waited for our aircraft, I noticed Alondra texting like mad to Amber, telling her everything she needed to know from her wide knowledge as a 5-year-old. Amber seemed to be playing along. Then I heard the text alert that I had set for Carson. Should he have spare time to text us? My daughter appeared to be chatting away with both of them, content as a clam to rise from my seat and take my phone from Alondra as our airplane prepared to board. Mom and Dad. I noticed how Catalina's cheeks flushed when Amber and David arrived to transport us to my parents' house. I know her and Amber hugged for such a long period. I never interrupted when she and Amber were talking. I could tell by the look on Catalina's face that Amber needed someone to talk to who wasn't attempting to manipulate her. "I know, Alondra. I appreciate David's praise. After all, he was about to become her brother-in-law." David agreed to it. I extended my hand to him, which he accepted, and then drew me into that masculine one-arm hug. "Are these all the bags you have?" they inquired, and I nodded in response. Amber pointed the car in this direction, clutching a laundry bag, which she was delighted to do. After all, Alondra hasn't seen her big sister in quite some time. "Wait, isn't that Mom's car?" I asked. "As I mentioned, the Buick?" "Yes, they've been allowing us to utilize it since. Ours has been giving us trouble lately." Amber expressed embarrassment, darkening her face. "What's wrong with this?" I inquired with that fatherly tone of mine. "Aside from being older than I am." "The engine died on us a few days ago," David added in a sorrowful tone. I looked at my wife. She understood exactly what I was thinking, giving me permission to spend that amount of money which we could afford. I was not about to let them drive about in an unstable vehicle. "What? Father wants his daughter to be stuck in a terrible section of town in a broken-down car with no way to return home." As we drove towards my parents' house, I noticed the Volvo showroom, knowing just where I'd be going in the morning, seeing as Thanksgiving was still 3 days away. I took out my phone and looked up the dealership to see what stock they had on their lot. As I approached the car and heard their conversation, I knew what I was going to acquire for them. It was a 2018 Volvo S60 with slightly more than 15,000 kilometers on it. It wasn't brand new, but it was quite close, so I knew they wouldn't be experiencing car problems for a while. My parents were waiting outside their house as Amber drove my mother's car into their driveway, beaming as a laundress shrieked with delight as she sprinted towards her grandparents, who were just as happy to see her as she was to see them. Catalina and I exchanged a few words as the open trunk smashed into my children and David's faces. Catalina mocked me as she handed my phone back, saying, "See, I knew you cared. Go make the call. I'll look after the bags." I noticed my parents' weird expressions as I waved before heading down the block so Amber and David wouldn't overhear the chat, dialing the dealership's number. As the phone rang, my gaze scanned my old neighborhood, noting the changes that had occurred since I was a youngster. "Hello, this is Mrs. Huffman. How can I help you?" "Hello. I was wondering whether you could hold the 2008 Volvo S60, the one with 15,000 miles remaining until tomorrow." When the very nice woman answered my phone, I spoke to her. "I can, so why not today? We don't close till 9. Do you?" I didn't realize that. Looking down, I checked my watch and noticed it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. "Can you have it ready for a test drive in 30 minutes? I inquired, knowing it would be an excellent car for David and Amber. "I surely can. May I know the name of the person I'll be interacting with?" "Mr. Nathan Hale." "Hello, Mr. Hale. I look forward to meeting you in half an hour." We hung up and I hastily returned to my folks' apartment. They were still gathered outside, conversing and waiting for my return. I demanded Amber keys, which my daughter dutifully tossed to me. "David, you're coming with me. Mom, Dad, sorry for this. We will be back," I said. I could see the perplexity on everyone's faces except Catalina's, who merely grinned and nodded in approval. Where are we going? Did you just get here? David inquired as I backed out of the driveway. It's a surprise, I replied, smiling as I returned to the showroom. As we drew inside the dealership, I could hear Nathan's surprised voice. You and my baby require an automobile. A reliable automobile, I said, shutting down the engine. What's more reliable than a Volvo? But consider it an early Christmas gift from Catalina and me to the two of you, I said, raising my hand as he began to speak. You'll have an automobile while you determine what to do with the other one. Mrs. Huffman had the car waiting and stood right by it, ready to sell. Good afternoon. Which of you guys is Mr. Hale? She requested in a courteous manner. I am. However, the car is for my future son-in-law and daughter, so he'll be taking the test drive. I stated this while resting my hand on David's shoulder. Mrs. Hoffman said, David, I wish my in-laws were as nice as yours. Hello, Mr. Callister, David supplied. Shall we go for a drive, Mr. McAllister? Mrs. Hoffman questioned, indicating toward the car. I could tell David was interested in all of the fancy gadgets packed into the dashboard as he started the car while I sat in the back seat. It was fairly comfortable in the back, listening to Mrs. Hoffman rattle off all the bells and whistles that came with the automobile as we cruised down the streets of my hometown. When we returned to the dealership and David handed her the keys, I knew he liked the automobile. Mrs. Hoffman said, Please, if you follow me, I'll start the paperwork, after I confirmed with David that Amber wanted the automobile. Now, how are you going to pay for this? She inquired once we had entered her small cubicle in full. I remarked, handing the woman my card, seeing David's stunned expression. Nathan, I told you it was an early Christmas present, I replied with a smirk. After all, I did not buy my daughter her first car. I do have a lot of time to catch up on. So, my in-laws never purchased us a car, Mrs. Huffman teased. I kept my smile to myself as I watched Red David becoming increasingly animated. Just let me go run this and get the car detailed for you, she remarked, rising from her seat. I looked over because David's phone was buzzing like crazy. If it is Amber, don't tell her anything. I want to surprise her. I said this while not seeing him. She's going to be surprised. All right. That is, if she does not freak out, David said, tapping away on his phone. I just told her that you and I were having a little man-to-man conversation. I nodded as he pocketed his phone. You have no idea how much this will mean to her. She's been stressed out by wedding expenditures, house bills, and now the automobile for the past month. I am confident that this will relieve her stress once more. I nodded. I understand how weddings can do that to a bride. The witch and Catalina were similar in this regard. Well, then I noticed David's facial expression shift as this strange ringtone played from his phone, giving him a look when the words, "Smack my witch up," started playing. I saw a brief glance of his screen which read, "Switch on it," before he declined the call. Is there anything you'd like to tell me before you marry my daughter? I asked in a protective, fatherly tone. Yeah, your ex-wife is a witch. I could not help myself. David's straightforwardness made me laugh out loud. That she is. I agreed. I assume that's who was calling? I asked, seeing him. Not. Yeah, the only ringtone I could find had the word witch in it. David laughed along with me. Well, I think it's really apartment. I wish I'd thought of it. I said it would have been a lot of fun in arbitration. I can. David nodded. Mr. Howe, here's your card and receipt. And, Mr. McAllister, please sign on the dotted lines where you see the red tabs, Mrs. Huffman directed. I wondered if this was the fastest she had ever sold a car. I folded the invoice before putting it in my pocket. While we may not be able to take that vacation, Catalina and I had planned to visit Spain. Given how I spent the money, it was for a really worthy cause, so I knew my wife wouldn't be too unhappy about it. Then again, how could she? She had signed off on it beforehand. Mr. Collector, Mrs. Huffman added the title for the automobile would be shipped to you in a few months, and the plate would be ready within a week, before handing David the keys and the temporary license plate. Thank you for selecting Crown Volvo, and if you have any issues with the vehicle, we are here to help. I waved to her as she escorted us out of the dealership. What will I tell Amber? David inquired, running his fingers through his hair while we waited for the details to be completed. A secret smile emerged on my lips as I recalled what came to mind. Here's what we'll do, I said before whispering my strategy to David. I pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:20 p.m. with David, waiting for my signal 2 homes down. As I approached the front door, I noticed activity in my parents' living room window. "Dad, where is David? And where have both of you been?" Amber questioned heatedly as she stood on the brick porch of my childhood house, my wife behind her, smiling. "Yeah, Poppy, you cannot leave like that," Alondra replied, mimicking Amber's stance, which I must agree was adorable as hell. I was doing this and that when my parents joined us, handing my mother her keys and hugging her before embracing my father. "Dad," I couldn't help but smile at my daughter's tone of voice. "Be patient, little mouse. I'm used to seeing my daughter's cheeks hit the pet name I gave her as a child. You'll notice her messaging David that it was showtime." Amber paid little attention to the blue 4-door Volvo as it drove along the curb. That is, until David got out of it. "David, what did you do?" Amber inquired, looking at the car. "You should inquire. What did I do?" I corrected her. "I hope you enjoy the automobile." "Honey," I replied, seeing the irritation evaporate into shock and joy. "You got us an automobile." "Amber." His words slipped out of her mouth as she attempted to get her thoughts to function. "Well, Catalina and I did," said before I was crushed by her hug. "Thank you very much," Amber said gleefully into my ear. "You are welcome, honey." I said this while watching Catalina hold Amber and cuddle her. "Don't you worry about anything. This is what a family does for each other." I noticed how my parents gave me that look, knowing I was never going to forget this. Well, I mentioned I was an idiot, so don't expect greatness all the time. I smirked as I watched Amber jump from the porch, run towards David, and leap into his arms. I could see the relief on my daughter's face as David wheeled her around, knowing they wouldn't have a large repair expense unless they opted to fix their old automobile. Personally, I would discard it if the engine failed. Probably would cost more to install a new engine than it was worth. Pulling my wife toward me as Amber announced that she was going for a brief spin around the neighborhood. I nodded in agreement, watching Amber race to the driver's door and David shake his head when Amber exclaimed, "Get in, you goof! You're coming with me?" I could tell when Amber slid into the driver's seat. She was amazed by all of the gadgets in front of her. It wasn't even 5 minutes until Amber returned the car to its original location. We had all waited outside to return. My smile spread to the corners of my mouth as I saw how happy my daughter was dancing in the seat as she cut the automobile off. Then she bolted from the car, leaving the door open as she dashed towards us. Amber hugged both my wife and me, saying, "I still love you too. Amber, you are very welcome." I noticed how Amber stared at Catalina as if she had done to her mother before she went insane. "Your father and I are pleased that we could assist the two of you. I am confident that this will relieve some of the stress you have been experiencing recently." I noticed Amber's eyes watering as she nodded, and I wondered what the two of them talked about when Amber called Catalina. I wouldn't intrude into their private chats. "I was just wondering, but you didn't have to buy such an expensive car. Fancy?" I joked. "That's a standard model. You'll only have to pay the taxes and maintenance on it." I huffed as those arms hugged me closely. I didn't say anything as I cuddled my baby, knowing how she needed it at the moment. "Okay, everyone, wash up. Dinner is nearly ready." My mother stood behind me, looking down as Alondra took her hand and led her into the house. Amber chuckled and wiped her eyes as David approached to stand by her side. "Nonsense. You are as lovely as ever," David explained, laying on the charm. Catalina and I left the two lovers, so Amber could compose herself as we walked in. We were halfway through our supper when Amber's phone rang from the living room. She would have just ignored it, but whoever it was kept phoning. She excused herself as she got up from the table and hurried into the living room. I tried not to eavesdrop. However, the instant Amber said the word "Mom," old behaviors returned. "No, I told you. David and I are celebrating Thanksgiving with his parents, and we will see you at Christmas. I don't mind if that doesn't suit you. Take it or leave it. We won't be home that day. How can I know whether Dad will be in town? I haven't talked to him since you chased him away. Remember?" Catalina placed her hand on my left forearm and shook her head as she realized I was ready to get up from my seat to confront my ex-wife. "Why do you care? Isn't the new man you're seeing not meeting your expectations?" I raised an eyebrow as I noticed the glitter in Catalina's eye at the tone of my daughter's voice. "Hello. I'm the one that called in the midst of supper and kept ringing my phone until I had to answer it," disturbing my dinner with Papa and Nana. Hearing my daughter's irritated ugh from the living room, I could understand. When I noticed the triumphant smile on her lips, my eyebrows lifted once more. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Amber replied with an ashamed expression as she re-entered the dining room. "Honey," I placed my hand on hers as she reclaimed her seat. "Has she been causing you problems?" I inquired in a concerned tone. "A bit. She thinks you're back in town." "I'm not sure who told her that, but it wasn't me," Amber stated. I noticed that her eyes implored me to believe her. "I don't care whether she knows I'm here. What counts is how she treats you. Do you want me to speak with her?" "No," she shakes her head. "I can handle Mom." I noticed Amber's gaze to Catalina. "I do not want to ruin this week because of her." "Okay, but if she goes too close, you let me know, and I'll snap that woman back so fast she'll get whiplash." I said this while patting my daughter's hand. "Thank you, Dad." I noticed her cheeks turning red as we finished our lunch. When it was time for Alondri's bedtime, David and Amber cuddled her for a long time before I dropped her out in my old bedroom, where Alondri always resided. Given that it only possessed a twin-sized bed, Catalina and I would use the hideaway bed in the study that used to be my cousin's room. When his parents went through a difficult period, they lost custody of their kid to my parents until he reached the age of 18. I knew he talked to my parents every day. I'm not sure if he does with his own. Not that I blame him. If I recall correctly, his father was sentenced to jail for cooking meth or something like. Amber and David left about 10 that night. Seeing as both of them had to work in the morning, they agreed to be done as soon as they finished their shifts. As the week progressed, no sightings of the witch occurred, which I was grateful for. I'm not sure who would have cut a chunk out of her hide first. My wife. For me. If she had thought to display herself, it would have been quite humorous. I reassure you. When Thanksgiving rolled around, my mother, David's mother, and Catalina confined me to the living room. David was conversing with my father and his father while the football pregame show aired. Amber was on the floor, playing an ancient board game with Alondra as the fireplace crackled. As I looked around the room, I couldn't think of a more touching picture than the 3 generations of teens living together. When Alondra approached me and grabbed my hand in hers, I dropped my gaze. "Come play," Poppy Alondra murmured with her sweet voice. I have to acknowledge it. At first, I was dreading returning home. No, not because of my daughter. No, it was a case of, "I told you so." My folks would punish me for being so dang stubborn. Being proven wrong is not always a bad thing. David's parents were polite, although I didn't appreciate how David's father treated my kid when she called me Poppy. I wasn't planning to make a big deal about it at the dinner table, not during Thanksgiving. My mother would kill me if I wrecked Thanksgiving again. I decided to keep my daughter away from him in the future. It didn't surprise me that Catalina noticed the same appearance. Unlike me, she had the decency to conceal her glances. After dinner, I called Amber into my old bedroom and asked what was going on with David's father, while Catalina kept Alondra close to her. Okay, kick me in the bum for assuming the worst about the dude. It was not because he was racist or a child predator. No, it was because Alondra resembled their lost daughter, who was roughly the same age as Alondra. I fell to my old bed, burying my face in my hands and assuming the worst of the man. I'm not sure what I'd do if I lost one of my daughters and another couple had one that looked like mine. It must be tearing the man apart within. Aside from making a complete mess of myself, the holiday wasn't too horrible. I understand. Catalina and David's mother got along after I told her in private about what Amber had told me. I know David's father was quite attentive to Alondra when she asked him a question. I even saw him play cards with her once. I knew the man was letting Alondra win on purpose, so I left them alone and went out the back to help bring in some firewood for my father. Needs assistance. I heard David's voice behind me and he could use another hand. I chuckled. Load me up. Please document this. Enough should be. I nodded. So you haven't told us you have a sister? Yeah. We don't talk about her very much, David said, lowering his gaze. I know Mom and Dad almost divorced when she died. I apologize. I did not intend to conjure up terrible recollections. It's okay. I know how my father acted. Set your hair on end. He gets like that sometimes, although he doesn't mean it, David said, hoping to reassure me. I got it. If something occurred to one of my daughters, I would most likely be a frightened wreck. curled up in a ball in the corner of a padded room. They must have had a difficult time going through that. I clapped David on the back and remarked, "I'm not sure how I accomplished it with a load of wood in my arms." "Alondra, what are you doing, you fool?" I teased as she chatted with David's parents, who were listening intently, and nodded my appreciation to David as he emptied my arms and stacked them with the others so my father could keep his fire going all night if he so desired. Talking. Alondra giggled. "You are you? I'm used to this." I almost dropped the last pieces of wood on my foot as a spider crawled out of the crevices between them. If it hadn't been for David's quick thinking in putting it on a stick and throwing it into the fire, my hero. I taunted, which made David's parents laugh, then sat down on the couch, called my daughter over, and rested her on my lap. "And just what are you three talking about? On everything you don't say." I responded, smiling at my kid as she used her arms to represent all of her knowledge. I noticed out of the corner of my eye how smitten David's mother was with Alondra. "I know she's thinking about the girl they lost." Alondra nodded. "You have a beautiful girl." David's mother, Meredith, spoke as she stared at the two of us. "I cannot take all the credit. That honor goes to my wife," I added, aware that my spider sense told me she was standing behind me and within earshot. "But I do love this munchkin," I cooed, tickling my daughter, who was laughing hysterically. "You don't mind if we take a photo of the two of you? Would?" David's father inquired, bringing out his cell phone. "We do not mind," I responded. When she shook her head, I noticed Meredith leaning on her husband, laying her head on his shoulder as they peered at our picture, helping Alondra down, watching her walk up to them, and seeing how good she looked in the photo. I noticed that they looked at me before picking her up, and I nodded, watching Meredith cuddle Alondra between her and her husband while they simply chatted. "Can I get you both something to drink?" I asked, rising from my seat and listening to my father snore in his turkey stupor. "I'll only be a moment." "So, Dad, what do you think about them?" Amber questioned as I entered the kitchen. "Is she?" My mother and Catalina were talking at the kitchen table. "Not bad, folks, but they'll be your in-laws, not mine," I remarked, rubbing Amber's shoulder as I walked to make David's father, who had a name. "And Meredith. A drink." "Yeah, but you're attending the wedding, and I want you all to get along." I felt my daughter's gaze on my back as I loaded it with ice. Aside from that minor misunderstanding, I don't see why we would. Then the world became frigid. I heard that voice from the past come through the front door as she knocked quickly. I turned to confront that woman for destroying our day, only to see my kid leap from her seat. "I'll do it, Dad, if Mom knows you are here." Amber marched towards the front door, insisting that she would not leave. "What have you taught my daughter?" I inquired, glancing at my wife, who had a seductive grin on her lips. My mother was beaming into her glass, which didn't escape my notice. "This and that," Catalina murmured faintly, tilting an eyebrow as she sat properly in her chair. "You no longer have to be concerned about that woman controlling her." Catalina took her own sip of the liquid. "Please tell me you did not train her to be as fiery as you are," I said, mimicking a sigh while pinching my nose. That's not polite, Nat," Catalina groaned, puffing her cheeks as she realized what was going on, that I was merely joking with her. "I thought you'd be pleased." "I am. It's good. You helped her regain her confidence. At least I know she has two mother figures watching out for her." I praised my wife and mother, and my wife blushed profusely. "So she's my daughter now, and the women in this family are strong-willed," Catalina replied, regaining her calm. "Don't I know it?" I murmured under my breath as I carried Georgia and Meredith's drinks to them. "What was that?" Catalina's voice drifted behind me. "It's nothing, honey," I called back. "Better be nothing." I knew she had said it in jest. "Papi, who is the woman? She does not seem to be happy," Alondra inquired, gazing out the window through the break in the drapes. "There is no one to worry about. So, what did I tell you about spying on other people's conversations?" I asked in a fatherly tone. I handed the two of them their beverages. "However, David is watching. Why can't I?" Alondra pouted. "Because David isn't spying on them. He's watching to make sure Amber is okay," I stated, seeing David nod along. "Is she a horrible person?" Alondra asked simply, unaware of the stranger. "My ex-wife, I believe she is." I observed David's parents' lack of involvement in the situation. "So what did she do?" Alondra inquired with the curiosity of a 5-year-old. Leave it alone, Alondra. I said. She must have noticed the sadness in my eyes, since she never mentioned that woman again. God, she irritates me sometimes, Amber hissed as she raced back into the home and threw herself in David's arms. Sorry, Dad. I did not intend to curse with Alondra. The room. I apologize, Papa George. Meredith, that you needed to be present for that. When I returned her gaze, she mumbled something while looking around the room. Amber, are you okay? I asked, knowing her mother was a sensitive topic. I will be. Amber moaned and hugged David. Tight. Are you, young man, attempting to take advantage of my daughter? I asked teasingly as they kissed, seeing David's parents' attempts not to laugh. David smiled as he stated this. Good, Dad. Amber gasped. What? This is 2021. It makes no sense to be stuck in the 1900s. Live a little. My kid was embarrassed by what I said. After all, isn't that what parents do when their children fall in love? However, I wonder if his thoughts are pure enough for me. I mused, rubbing my chin, watching my daughter's face become various shades of scarlet as I proceeded to tease. I guarantee you, Nathan, that they are not. Amber smacked his chest and told him not to join in on my shenanigans, which made me laugh. Dinner was a riot as we all gathered around the table to eat the leftovers from lunch. Laughter and anecdotes abounded as we all shared stories, with a laundry chiming in to tell them about our excursion to the zoo's beach. Catalina hinted that we were planning a trip to Spain after the wedding next year. Of course, Amber seems unsurprised by the news. After all, she and Catalina had gotten as close as thieves over the months. Then we said our goodbyes to David's parents, Amber and David, agreeing to spend Friday together before flying back to Charlotte on Saturday, when it was time to leave. There were plenty of hugs to go around, knowing we wouldn't see each other until March, unless. They traveled in to see us for Christmas, which I hoped they would do, but knew Amber wouldn't. Not if she didn't want to deal with my ex-wife over being left out. Personally, I believe she may rot in that town, but Amber is the one who has to live there with her. So I didn't want to rock the boat and left her to cope with the aftermath. The next 21 days were quite difficult for me since I was so anxious to meet my son. Carson intended to fly in on the 19th and leave on the 26th, allowing him to save the remainder of his leave for Amber. What about his wedding? Not that I cared. I'd have my boy with me for 6 days. Because of my tenacity, I had 6 more days with him than in the previous 7 years. I knew Catalina was annoyed with me. She didn't say anything, despite the fact that she knew I was nervous as I waited for Carson's arrival with Catalina and Alondra. Carson! 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 Alondra jumped for pleasure at the sight of her half-brother, her mother waving her hand enthusiastically as we waited for my son to make his way through the crowd. Go on! Catalina spoke again, giving me her lovely grin as she nudged my arm. Carson's luggage fell to the ground as his peace intensified. We crushed one another in a strong hug, and I held my son in my arms like I had before his mother went wild. Look at you, I said. My tears welled up with pride as I clasped my son's face in my hands. You've matured so much. I tried not to shed tears. I tried. But this was my boy. Won't you? Come on, Dad. Do not embarrass me in front of Mom. Even though my kid was now a grown man, I could still see the small boy I had reared. However, I did wonder when my children began to refer to Catalina as their mother. Not that I was against it. It was only a thought that would likely go unanswered. I hope your flight was uneventful. Carson Catalina stated this as she joined me in hugging my son. It read, "Thank you for everything." I raised an eyebrow when I heard my son murmur something to Catalina. Catalina rubbed my son's back and asked what he meant when he said it's what family is for. I'll always be here for you too, so don't hesitate. Call. I noticed my son holding her tighter when she said that. I looked down when Alondra tugged on his slacks, indicating that she too wanted a hug and extended her arms to him. Hello, little sister, Carson greeted, bending down and hugging his sister warmly. I was impressed when Alondra patted Carson's right bicep as he flexed his muscle for her. I still think I have my son beat. I may be old, but not old enough for my kid to abuse his father. Carson, what are your plans after you get out of the Army? I inquired as we went back to my car, wondering about being an engineer. When he replied me, I could detect a matter-of-fact tone in his voice. "Are you in the army?" I inquired, looking across at him as he strolled alongside Catalina. Carson shook his head. "No, I'm just a grunt." "Are you looking at schools? I have a couple ideas." I noticed his nod. "Maybe we can help you narrow it down." Catalina spoke in a loving tone, and I nodded along. "I have one in mind, but I'm not sure if you'll go with it." I noticed my son covertly eyeing me, and where was that? I inquired as I opened the trunk of my automobile. "Duke." When my son said that name, I stopped dead in my tracks. "What have you said?" I spoke, attempting to keep my voice steady. "I understand it's not close, but it's closer than California, and I assumed you'd be fine with me. Coming." I heard my son's half as I abruptly held him. "Of course, son. You can return home whenever you choose." "You know that," I responded, my voice quivering. "I can't promise you'll keep that figure with Catalina cooking and my wife lightly spanking my arm, but I could see by her smile that she was as excited as I was." "Are you sure?" "I do not want to. Carson, you are always welcome in our home. It is yours, and Amber is Catalina's home." Cut in with her sweet motherly voice as she tenderly touched my son's right arm. "Yeah, my brother is coming home." Alondra squealed as she performed a little dance. "I'm really thrilled you both mentioned that." I raised an eyebrow as I noticed the tension on his shoulders. "I've already been accepted for the start of the autumn semester next year." I could only laugh as I placed my arm around Carson's shoulders and drew him into me, seeing his flushed face as I bestowed my fatherly pride on him. "Okay, let's get you home. Amber and David are going to be upset because they lost the guest bedroom." I chuckled as I placed my son's bag in the trunk of my car. "Here," I said, offering out a beer. My kid as he rested against the railing of my balcony, looking out at the city. "You are old enough." Don't give me that expression I gave when my son stared at me with the alcohol in my hand. "I never believed I'd be able to do this with you." Carson spoke, removing the bottle from my grasp. "I didn't either," I admitted. "I'm glad I was proven wrong. Catalina appears to be deeply in love with you," Carson muttered offhandedly. "As do I." Turning to wave at Mom as she puttered around the condo, Alondra colored in her coloring book on the coffee table. Carson's words remained in his throat as I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," Amber assured me. "Your mother should never have put you two in such a scenario. That is not the way a parent should act. I just never knew. She would go that low to entice the two of you into her machinations to keep me as an unsuspecting cook. So, instead of worrying about the past, let us focus on the present." Carson smiled warmly and tapped the neck of his beer bottle against mine. "So, Dad, are you two going to have any more children?" When my son asked that, I nearly spat out my beer. "Don't you do this?" I chided, wagging my finger at my son who was simply smiling like an idiot. "Have you talked to Catalina?" "To this." My son simply nodded. "We'll try after your sister's wedding." "But I do not know, Carson. By the time Alondra reaches high school, I will be in my 50s. So does it matter whether you are or not?" My son made a good argument. "And will you be okay with another brother or sister?" I asked, leaning on the railing. "Yeah, our family may have crumbled, but you were always a good father." "I cannot say the same about Mom." I rubbed my son's back while he groaned. "Your mother is completely responsible for what she did, so don't bother yourself about it." I said this before taking my last swallow of beer. "Come on, lunch should be ready." I spoke while grabbing my son's empty beer bottle from him. "What are we having, carnitas?" "I promise you'll adore them," I replied with a loving smile as I brought my son back into the condo. "This is good." I watched as my son groaned with pleasure as he took his first bite of carnitas. "What's in this?" I observed the way he looked at my wife, like a toddler seeking his mother's wisdom. "Pork. Just pork. A little seasoning, primarily pork." Catalina responded with her characteristic smile. "Please, if you're still hungry, there's much more to enjoy." "Even though you are, I would get to it before your father." I gave my wife a smile as she winked at my kid, who sat next to Alondra and kissed me. I know she was thrilled that my two adult children liked her cuisine. I saw Alondra show Carson how to fold it so that the filling wouldn't fall out when he took a bite, and I noticed the huge smile on Alondra's lips when Carson inquired whether he did it correctly. I was encouraged to see how well my children got along despite their age gaps. I knew Alondra got lonely occasionally because she was the only child in the house. It thrilled my heart to learn that she could now communicate with her siblings. When that happened, I warned you, son. He reached for some hot sauce. Relax. I can handle it. Mom got me hooked on it. Catalina's face burned when my kid smiled at her. What did you do to my son? I asked teasingly. He broadened his palate. Don't blame him. He has good taste, Catalina replied, throwing her nose up at me. I believe we should have a conversation about this later in the dormitories. So I spoke in a wicked tone. Is that so? Catalina responded with a purr. Yes, a pleasant view of China is in order. I spoke softly so Alondra wouldn't hear me, noting how my wife's nostrils flared, her breathing quickened, and the blush that colored her cheeks as the flames of her hunger burned in her eyes. I'm looking forward to it, Catalina replied in a sexy tone before biting into her rice. It was not lost on me. Carson was looking at the two of us while chewing his bite before the smile appeared on his lips, and then going to his dinner when Christmas arrived, like many children do on that day. Alondra appeared at my bedside at far too damn early in the morning on my day off, with that smile on her face that indicated it was time to open presents. I wonder if youngsters have a network for such situations, where they may freak the ever-loving shit out of their parents while they are still half asleep. Thank you, Mom. Carson yawned as he received his cup of coffee from Catalina. What shall I say? Catalina wore the mantle, and I wasn't going to stop my children from calling her that after Amber told me. I figured they needed someone who treated them like a child. After breakfast, we met in the living room. Alondra dashed around, handing out gifts to every one of us and setting her pile to the side. I bought my son a very costly watch with the time zone set to the East Coast and the main face set to Pacific time. However, I gave my wife a gift other than the pearl earrings and necklace. Not the sort you're thinking of, but I also give her. But that is neither here nor there. What actually confused my wife on Wednesday morning was the set of keys she withdrew from a velvet box I had gotten into. Nat Catalina gave me that look as if to explain, You've always wanted a big family. You never mentioned anything but a spouse knows. As I spoke, I noticed her eyes expand. And unfortunately, this condo is not spacious enough to accommodate our family and future additions, I said, resting my palm on her stomach as she stared down at it. I know my anxiety throughout the past month grated on your nerves regarding Carson's arrival, but it was also to keep you from knowing what I was doing when we were talking. You have a knack for sniffing out stuff. I smiled and touched my lips as her mind rushed to process what I was saying. Did you buy us a house? Catalina exclaimed, leaping from her seat. I did. I knew the bank had some foreclosed properties sitting around, so I looked through them until I found one that was big enough for our purposes. The bank and I agreed to take the payment out of my checks, so we don't have to worry about mortgages. We can move in after the first of the month, I added, watching as her emotions fluctuated before she shrieked with delight and leaped into my arms. Mom, you're going to enjoy this site. Carson smiled at both of us. You knew I couldn't stop smiling as Carson bent his head in embarrassment. I did. Dad took me there on Monday to see whether I wanted to stay there when I returned home on weekends. I bit my lip because Carson's voice was so little when he said that. My hand glided over my wife's back as she got from her seat and walked over to Carson, keeping my questioning expression to myself. Carson got this expression in his eye, similar to Amber's gaze at Catalina on Thanksgiving. That reminded me of how he used to look at his mother when he was a tiny boy, as Catalina took his face into her hands. Did you like it? Good, Catalina cooed after Carson nodded and hugged him. Carson, we want you to come home as often as you want. You and Amber will always be welcome at our home. Never forget that. I was taking a dry sip when her brown eyes caught mine. Now you are going to show me the house you had bought for us. Now, where do we go? Catalina inquired as I started my car. Belmont? I responded, backing out of my parking place at the condo complex, which I planned to rent out because we own it outright. I know traffic would be horrendous in the mornings. Still, actually, when Amber and David came to visit, that condo already felt small, and I wanted all of my children to be able to come home knowing they had somewhere to stay. It took roughly 30 minutes to get to Belmont due to light traffic on I-85, then another 10 to get to the old district. The home was located. I heard my wife and daughter gasp as I drove up the concrete driveway and into the attached garage to the two-story red brick house. While the windows were old, they were bordered with black fixed shutters. The house had been brought up to code to prevent cold drafts from leaking in. "How large is this place?" Catalina inquired as she got out of the automobile. As the garage door closed, she bundled herself tightly into her coat. The main half of the house has 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and an apartment over the garage. I was contemplating about letting Carson stay there, so when he comes to see us, he won't have to worry about waking us up if he arrives late. I pointed to the side door and the stairs that lead up to it. "You don't mind my wife nodding along?" Catalina inquired, staring at him while my son stood by her side. "No, I believe that is a good concept," Carson said. "I'll try not to bring too many girls home," which made me laugh in amusement before guiding me into the house and unzipping my own coat. Given that the heat was on, I could only suppose my wife was imagining how the spacious kitchen would appear once we had the appliances installed. Smiling as my daughter mimicked her mother as Alondra went about investigating the bottom cabinets as Catalina was doing with the overhead, while I watched Alondra run about the empty living room, giggling like crazy with all the space. I showed my wife the only bedroom and bathroom on the ground, telling her that I felt it would be an excellent place for Amber and David to stay if they visited us again. That way they'd have solitude to do what couples do. Seeing her nod in agreement. "You know, we'll have to." "Kristen, this place?" Catalina muttered lustfully in my ear as she snuggled up to me. "I can't wait until that day," I responded. "Hell, wouldn't you show me the rest?" Catalina purred. She had a mischievous look on her lips as she noticed how I adjusted myself. "What shall I say? My wife has this impact on me. Alondra!" I yelled out to him and my wife, who were nearby. "Yes, Poppy, Alondra!" His voice echoed throughout the house as she raced towards us while playing with Carson. "Let's see your new bedroom." I smiled as Alondra nodded fervently, wincing as my daughter shouted in laughter as she whirled around her room in the west wing of the home down, the corridor from the master bedroom showing the room I assumed may be the baby's nursery if we had another, while Alondra investigated her new surroundings. My wife put her head on my chest while kissing the top of her head. I could tell she was visualizing the new bundle of joy as she peered into it. "It's perfect, honey. Catalina is happy. Now what I really want to know is how the main bedroom looks." She spoke with a seductive smirk on her lips, her libidinous brown eyes looking up at mine. "I thought you'd never ask," I answered, mirroring her smile. "Look at all that closet space," Catalina shrieked before racing inside the master bathroom. "My God, it has a jacuzzi bathtub." I noticed she was already sitting there when I walked in, noticing how the bathroom lights ran along. The black marble that surrounds the roundish tub was intended for 2 individuals to sit on a raised platform. The standing shower sat in a corner facing the toilet, while the dual sinks flanked the wall close to the bathtub. "Why, Mr. Hall, I feel you are attempting to seduce me. You are aware of my marital status, correct?" Catalina looked at me while batting her eyelids. "What a shame. A lovely woman like you deserves to be wined and dined, and perhaps some midnight activities in that tub," I murmured, playing along and twitching my brows. "I do not know. Do you think you can manage this hot and gorgeous Latina woman?" Catalina purred and gave me that look. I was all too familiar with the same gaze that made me horny. She knew it as well. Most definitely. I spoke it with hard determination. My pulse raced as I watched her eyes flame up with hunger and bit her lip while I taunted her about it. "Mr. Hell, are you going to take me here in this tub over and over again, making me wail and bliss as you claim me as your woman?" My head bobbed wildly as her hand traveled along her firm backside. "Good. You are better. You should never leave your wife longing for her man's touch," Catalina purred, flicking her tongue against her teeth. "I would never do that. That's a crime against nature." I spoke genuinely, watching her smile widen in anticipation of the events that lay ahead for us. "You nasty old man, are you getting me all hot and bothered?" Catalina cooed and posed in the tub, ruffling her hair with one hand. "I'll make certain to accept full responsibility for my mistakes," I spoke in a wicked tone. "Your best. You will not be receiving any of this for a while, honey. Does the water work?" I noticed how swiftly she got out of the bathtub. "Yeah. Why? 1 or 2? "1. Catalina spoken. doing this little dance while pulling out some tissues from my coat for Alondra. I have a runny nose on cold days like today. I hand them to my wife before closing the bathroom door behind me. Alondra and I walked down the stairs, raising an eyebrow at how crimson my son's face was. "Is there something wrong, son?" I inquired once we reached the ground floor. "It is nothing." "Don't worry about it," Carson said, unwilling to look me in the eyes. "I overheard you and Catalina conversing. I did not mean to. I was only visiting to check how she loved the place." I merely chuckled at my son's situation. "It's okay, son. There's no shame in that," I remarked casually, rubbing his shoulder as we both gazed out the living room window into the neighborhood that would soon become our new home. "Carson, show me your apartment," Catalina replied as she gently descended the steps. "Sure, Mom." I noticed the joy in his eyes as he stated I approved. Catalina mused and nodded as she looked around the large floor space. I noticed how a launderette darted into the small bathroom, which situated in the far right corner next to the equally small kitchenette. "We'll go shopping for you when you move here," I observed as my wife softly caressed my son's back while he nodded. I noticed Catalina bring out her phone as it chirped. "Honey, if we don't leave, my folks will be furious if we miss Christmas lunch," Catalina stated, looking over at me. "Then we should get moving." I nodded. "Are you sure? You are heading to Carson? You are now part of our family." "Get used to it," Catalina replied playfully, touching his face and sliding her arm around as we approached the steps. When we arrived at her parents' house, we were greeted warmly. Carson, on the other hand, was overwhelmed with embraces and warm congratulations from everyone. I noticed how Catalina's uncle, who was becoming deaf, took a liking to my kid because he, too, was a former service member. He joined the Marines during the Desert Storm era. When they started using military lingo, I had absolutely no understanding what they were talking about. I nodded at my kid as he was dragged into the mob, the strong hand of Catalina's uncle. While my wife and I went to welcome her relatives, Alondra wandered off to play with her cousins. I was conversing with Hector and one of Catalina's cousins. As I covertly observed how she would gaze at me while speaking softly to her mother and sisters, the three of them shouted with delight. When my sister-in-law looked at me, I noticed an approving expression on her lips. Roberto exclaimed, embracing me with a warm hug. "How is it going?" I inquired, caressing my brother-in-law's back. "Doing well. I can't complain. How is it going now that your son is back home?" I noticed the sneer on his lips when he asked me that, just like everyone else there. They all believed I was silly and stubborn for acting the way I did over the last 7 years. I couldn't claim they weren't wrong in that regard. Good. I'm glad he's going out of the army shortly. I admitted that I saw Hector nodding and comprehending. "What are his plans once he has done this?" Roberto asked sincerely. "He's heading to college." I spoke in a proud, fatherly tone. "Where?" Hector inquired, joining the conversation. "Duke?" I responded with a smile on my face. "Will he come home?" "I hope so." I nodded at Roberto. My gaze shifted to the left of Hector, where I saw my son attempting to grab my attention and excusing himself. I moved around my family members and proceeded towards my son. I looked down at how my son grabbed my arm and hauled me away without explanation. "Dad? Who is that?" Carson asked. I could detect a great interest in his voice as he pointed out the window. "That's Maria." I assumed it was Maria until I noticed the little star tattoo on her left wrist. When she raised her palm to her face, the sleeve of her sweater slid down her arm as she spoke with one of her many cousins. In my defense, they were identical twins. Maria was married, Rosa wasn't. "Sorry, that's Rosa. Why?" I asked, seeing the perplexed expression on his face. "Maria is Rosa's twin sister," I supplied while Carson mouthed. "Dad, what exactly does it do?" Carson took a bit to enunciate what Rosa had said, which he had overheard, so I kept my laughter hidden. I have to admit I was a little flattered that a 20-year-old thought this old man was handsome when she said my son was just as handsome as me. That's what I got from it. "Tell me, kid, why you're trying to speak Spanish?" I asked. Catalina's family did not take kindly to anyone who knew their language, so I can talk with Mom and Alondra. I couldn't help but smile as the corners of my lips rose. "Who has been helping you?" I inquired. Carson was too skilled for a newbie to know how to roll his R's like he did. I knew he needed someone to help him just like I did. However, he, like me, struggled with it at first. A friend in my unit. When I told him why I wanted to learn, he was delighted to assist. Carson spoke in a sheepish tone. Carson, there is no shame in wanting to learn Spanish. As I turned to see my wife in the doorway, our gazes locked. I watched her smile as she lifted her lips. I learnt because I adored that woman, nodding in Catalina's way. When Carson laughed as she went into my office and urged me to get whatever had crept up my bum out of it, I smiled like crazy. But how do I talk to her? I don't want to sound like an idiot, you know. Carson groaned and turned his gaze back to the window. Dad? When I signaled for Rosa to come over and speak with me, his head snapped towards me. Relax, son. I'm only helping, I mused. I loved the expression on my son's face. Who says parenting isn't fun? Consider all of the embarrassing situations you could expose your child to, like just at that moment. Nathan has quit. Yes, Fatemi, Rosa spoke after she had appeared in the doorway. Would you mind speaking English while my son is still learning? It would be impolite to continue this conversation with him without understanding a word of it, I stated. Rosa's eyes shifted to Carson, and she smiled softly. Yes, of course, Nathan. What should we talk about? I noted. She immediately understood why she was there. I knew that if she wasn't interested, she wouldn't have stayed or spoken English, given that it has been banned from the gatherings, unless my kids were in town. Hola, Carson spoke, stepping forward and extending his hand. I would like to say more in Spanish, but, well, I'd rather not ruin it and make you think I'm an idiot. I arched an eyebrow at my son's opening remark, which was not something I would have said. Nonetheless, it seemed to be working. Rosa replied, Hola, Carson. Your father has spoken a lot about you. That was my cue to leave. What's going on inside there? Catalina asked as soon as I reached her side. You know, two kids from different worlds finding each other in the darkness of night, amused with a broad grin on my lips. I hope they can get along. Rosa needs a good man, Catalina said, wrapping her arm around me as we listened to how her sister's trip turned out when she went home to Mexico for vacation. The moment it was time to head home, I went searching for my son, only to stumble into what appeared to me as a rather steamy session to have him home before midnight. I teased before either of them could say a word, when only surprise filled their faces at being intruded upon. Rosa nodded as her face heated, knowing what I was saying and knowing I meant it. Shaking my head, chuckling to myself as I walked down the hall. Who knew my son could move fast? Where's Carson? Catalina asked, looking behind me for my son, Ellie Stasi, in the Romeo Parachute Juliet, I whispered in Spanish into her ear. Was her only response as her eyes lit up at the news. She'll bring him home, I said, leading my wife and daughter out the door after waving our goodbyes to them. It was 11 on the dot when a quiet knock came on my condo door. As I opened it, there was my kid, the grinning fool, shaking his head when he uttered, "Best Christmas ever. You know, if you cheat on her, you best stay on the West Coast," I stated as my son walked towards the... A malicious smirk emerged on my lips as that stopped my son in his tracks. Rosa will kill you. No, lie to this. My wife nodded, who had stayed up with me to wait for my son to return. You're joking, right? Carson stammered. No, Rosa has a worse temper than Catalina does. Yes, you do, I said, gazing over at her as she pouted. Hey, Rosa dislikes cheaters. Her father abandoned their mother and fled with the lady. So if you believe this has any possibility of going anywhere, you should keep it in your pants. I spoke to my kid, offering him my fatherly counsel. Dad, thank you for the heads up, Carson declared unequivocally. I'm not going to be like Mom. I felt a little gratified when I saw the truth in my son's eyes. Thank you for taking me along. Your family is amazing, Mom. I'm about to go to bed. Night, Dad, Mom. Good night, Carson. I am delighted you had fun, Catalina remarked, rising from her seat. Night, son. I talked as I watched my kid go for his room, knowing that tomorrow was the last day I'd see him until March. Come once more, let's go to bed, Catalina cooed as she snuggled up to me. Hey, as if I would ever turn down the opportunity to have sex with that woman. That indicates I have been replaced by a pod person, something no rational man would do. I adore you, Dad, Carson said as we hugged and stood at the airport. I love you too, son. You take care of yourself, right? I responded by simply patting his back. Of course, I have to keep an eye out for my little sister, and boys will soon emerge from the woodwork. I noticed my daughter blushing when my son smiled down at her. Nice one. Adios, Soloists. Louisville. Alondra. My wife smiled when Carson said those words and hugged his sister farewell. Alondra asked, terrified, "You promised to be safe." "Promise?" Carson nodded. "You'll keep an eye out for Dad, right?" My daughter's lips formed a loving smile as she straightened her back, squared her shoulders, put her hands on her hips, and nodded firmly. "You phone us as soon as you land. I'll worry till you do." Catalina spoke in a kind voice as they hugged. "I will." Carson answered, "You have my word." I noticed how he was holding back his feelings, just like my wife was. I've observed that since that day when Amber contacted me unexpectedly, Catalina has referred to them as her son and daughter rather than her stepchildren. I could see the pride in her eyes as she did. I thought with her help, we could undo the damage their mother had done to them. I refused to go along with her damn cock. "I will meet you all in March," Carson yelled out once he had passed past the checkpoint by the sun. I called back with a raised hand. After that, life was frantic with packing up the condo, coordinating with the movers, and moving into the Belmont house. Everything is neat and orderly, including the packaging. She also assisted us in finding renters and subleasing our property, who turned out to be one of her co-workers in the accounting department where she works. The man needed to get away from his wife, whom he was about to divorce. Get this, on the basis of adultery. It's a small world, and he needed a property large enough for his 2 children that was close to work, so he wouldn't have to visit his wife. So I was pleased to work with him to get an acceptable rent payment. Then there was the question of whether I wanted to perform the yard care and upkeep myself or hire someone else to do it. Fortunately, my wife solved the situation when she called Roberto, who has his own lawn care business and employs many of his nephews. We still pay him half the sum he regularly charges. He'll assist Catalina in deciding what plants she wants to put in the front and back yards as the weather warms up. Alondra adored her new home, but for the first several weeks she would crawl into our bed at night. I can't blame her for the new old house. Strange noises in the night could startle a 5-year-old. Then came the night when she retired to her own bed and stayed there all night. And yeah, Catalina and I did break into that tub fairly frequently, and I enjoyed every single second of it. I know she did too. I speak with my children once a day, if not more, depending on how busy they are with their own life. I noticed Catalina walking around the house several times, conversing with one of them. The next day, Carson returned to his base. When I told Amber about the house, she was overjoyed to learn that she and David had their own room here if they ever visited again. However, they put all of their trip plans on hold until after the honeymoon. I cannot blame them. I knew the wedding was taking a toll on their finances. Given how Catalina and I had stepped in on a few occasions to cover shortfalls, I know my parents helped as much as they could. Nonetheless, I had a sickening feeling developing within of me. I couldn't find it at first. However, as the days passed and Amber's wedding day came, I had a strong suspicion that my ex-wife would wreck it. I know Catalina because of my emotions. I understand it was irrational. Then again, we're talking about my ex-wife. Rationality was not something that was known for. Catalina assured me that she would not ruin AMR's wedding, no matter how poor she was as a bride. I knew she meant well. Furthermore, my wife has never met her or spent time with her, so she'd have no idea how horrible that may be. As the day arrived for us to fly out a few days before the wedding so we could attend the rehearsal dinner, I buried my fears behind a smile as Alondra skipped towards the terminal, accompanied by her mother and Rosa, which I thought weird. That is, until I noticed the incredibly rosy cheeks she displayed as my sight fell on her. I worried if what I observed at Christmas had spread beyond that day. It seems it did. Hector had planned to attend, but a blood clot prevented him from doing so. He was barred from flying, and he didn't want to drive the 14 hours to Kansas City by automobile. So he decided to stay at home and gave his to Rosa, who was really eager to go. Rosa? Yes, Nathan. As we approached the terminal, I noticed her eyes looking sideways at me. "Are you and my son dating?" I asked in a fatherly tone. "See, I hope you're not upset." Rosa spoke. Her statements gave me the impression that she was looking for my acceptance. "Go easy on him. I doubt he has ever fallen in love with a Latina woman before," I said, giving her a kind grin, and watched as Catalina's mother laughed at my response. Catalina smacked my arm lightly, but she was also amused. "I will try. He resembles his father. Sweet and handsome. Set Rose aside." Catalina nodded in agreement. But there's also a guy. Sometimes we are idiots. Again, the women burst out laughing. So you're okay with us dating? Rosa inquired hesitantly as we sat down, waiting for our aircraft to board. No, I do not. In the end, what matters most is that the two of you are happy, I replied, feeling my wife's fingers slip into mine. However, you harmed my son. You'll need to deal with his mother, I said, pointing with my thumb at Catalina, who was smiling like a mother. All is well, I believe Rosanna added firmly. So how long have you been dating? I asked. I'm curious to know which parent isn't. Being away since New Year's has been difficult. And I understood exactly what I was getting myself into when we started this. I simply want him to return home for good. What shall I say? So was I. I know we are too. I nodded in accord. You already know he'll be attending Duke in the autumn? And I think that's fantastic, Rosa responded. However, I had the impression that he was keeping something from me. So, do you two have any plans for when he comes home for the summer? I have plans. A great many plans. With that sexy gleam in her eyes, I knew my son needed to keep an eye out. He might get devoured. Rosa dropped her suitcase and raced into my son's arms, which Catalina and her mother picked up. I had to clear my throat at how passionately they kissed, as if they were in their own universe, although I was thrilled that my son's Spanish had improved much over Christmas. Annette Catalina, his step-grandma, offered him some tiny pointers when he mispronounced a word, much as a mother would do. Otherwise, I could see she was happy with his growth. I looked at Rosa, who was looking aside innocently. Hello, Dad. Carson welcomed me with a friendly hug. How are you doing, son? Cannot complain. Is it better now? I noticed how he looked at Rosa, who blushed furiously as my son pulled away. I'll drop the three of you off at Grandma's, and you two will stay with her. Amber and Dave. How about you? Rosa asked. I noticed how swiftly she moved up to his side. I'm not going to subject you to my mother. Nobody deserves that. I wholeheartedly agree with this. I don't care, Carson. I want to spend time with you. The way she looked at my son. It reminded me of how Catalina behaved when we first started dating, with that over-the-moon period. I'm not saying she doesn't understand that look. Still, it faded out with her seductive come-here gaze. Rosa, are you sure about that? You're stepping into a minefield, I warned. Nathan, I can handle her. Rosa spoke with a look. I knew the witch would not know what hit her if she pushed Rosa. Do not say you weren't warned. I exhaled. Carson, if she becomes too much for you, call me. I will straighten her out. Are you sure, Dad? Do you know what Mom would do if she knew you were in town? I noticed the anxious expression on his face as he looked at Catalina. I don't care what she does. I'm not going to let her ruin your sister's wedding day, I replied harshly. From the corner of my left eye, I noticed 3 women staring at me in surprise. Nat said she would. Sorry, Mom, but you do not know her. She'd do it in an instant if it meant getting to you. Carson said this while staring directly at me. Okay, why? What is it about me that has captivated her for so long? I asked, finally closing the gap. She still believes she can get you back and continue sleeping around like she always has? She will never win over my hubby? Catalina let out a snarl. I wondered if she had finally realized what the witch was really like. That will never happen. She should have realized that when I left her that day. It appears that I must demonstrate to her that I have clearly traded up, I remarked, smiling at my wife and wrapping my arm around her. Yes, you did. If you see her, please let me know, Catalina remarked, looking up at me. Do you think I won't? That woman makes me angry. Not at what she did to us, but with our children. There's nothing more, I reassured her. Good. I'm not giving you up. Ever. I'm glad to hear it. I murmured this while palming her rear and watching her cheeks flare up. Carson led us from the airport, hand in hand with Rosa. After retrieving the bag she had dropped, Carson carried the other in his free hand. Carson, isn't that? My voice faded off against the side of the vehicle. Yeah, Carson whispered over his shoulder. David's mom is letting me use it to shuttle you around while you're here. Ah, that was lovely of her, I commented. Yes, she is a nice lady. I overheard my son's agreement. No, Rosa, you cannot sit back there. How else are you going to distract my son? I inquired with a mischievous smirk on my lips, hearing my son's father and the chuckling of my mother-in-law and wife from inside the vehicle. Nathan Rosa gasped in embarrassment. I was amused with myself as Rosa's face transformed into a ripe tomato, but she didn't hesitate to get into the front passenger seat when I held the door open for her. "Well, son, we are waiting," I muttered as I slipped the door shut. Catalina gently chastised me for taunting him so much, but I could tell she was delighted as well. We initially dropped off Catalina's mother at Amber's. Also, we could see her, and as you could expect, Amber and Catalina exchanged many smiles and tears. David and I exchanged a masculine handshake before transitioning into our classic one-arm hug, thanking Catalina and I for our assistance in getting everything paid for their special day. Then I stepped back and heard my daughter's brother inquire whether Rosa was the one he couldn't stop talking about. I have never seen my son's ears turn this red before. I should have brought popcorn after the sibling banter was ended. Amber greeted Rosa like a sister. David was his gentlemanly self, promising Catalina that they would look after her mother while she stayed with them. Amber expressed the same fear as Carson and I when she realized that Rosa would be staying with him at their mother's house. Nevertheless, Rosa convinced Amber that she could handle the witch. "I don't know about that. We'll see how she makes it through the first night there." Carson and I spoke privately in my parents' driveway, with him nodding along and reassuring me that he would phone if anything happened throughout the night. Wave goodbye to them. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling in my stomach. I didn't realize until the next day that something had happened. However, it was not the person I expected to rock the boat. Whoever the witch was seeing at the time, it was sensible to try Rosa's products when Carson wasn't watching. According to my son, he raced into what used to be my kitchen as the man attempted to forcibly kiss her. Rosa was called a variety of names, all of which I knew she was not. I believe the man was more a lover than a combatant. As the cliché goes, Carson dropped him like a load of potatoes. Now comes the very bizarre part. The witch reacts to it all. I was on edge when my kid told me as I stood on my parents' brick porch that 3 or 4 people were up to something. I simply knew she was up to something. What it was, I couldn't say. Carson was thinking the same thing I was. "So, what are you planning to do?" I inquired, my thumb and index finger pinching my bottom lip as I attempted to figure out the witch's intentions. "I'd get a motel room, but that would mean I couldn't keep an eye on Mom. She's extremely polite to Rosa. It's quite creepy. Tell me about it." I groaned and rubbed my hand on the back of my head. "Shit, she's coming. I will call you later." "Okay, son." I exited before the connection went dead. "Is everything okay? There's more." "How?" When I hear her voice, it always seems to brighten my spirits, especially now. "When my angel appears," I replied sinfully, noting her shy expression as she brushed a strand of her hair behind her ear, blushing and wondering if she remembered that night. I do. I relive that every time I close my eyes. My wife was going to say something when my cell phone rang. "Carson, Nathan, get out there. Carson's mother realized you were here. I apologize for letting that slip. I did not mean to." She heard us. Carson could not stop her. I noticed Catalina was worried. Look at her face. When I told her, she noticed an immediate difference in my manner. "Rosa, you have nothing to apologize for. It was going to happen. Just let me deal with her. You and Carson head out for a good breakfast, all right?" I spoke as calmly as possible, but my hold on my phone was tightening. "Are you sure?" I could hear her indecision in her voice. "Very. Tell Carson to take you to the location. I used to take him to breakfast when he was a boy. You two simply enjoy the morning. Don't let this situation mar your time together." I tucked my phone into my jammies, the rage I felt 7 years ago returning. "Honey, what's wrong?" Catalina inquired with anxiety. "Lord disgrace, Yada is on his way." I snarled as I walked into my parents' house. I'd prefer converse with her while wearing pants. I had never used that word around her until I mentioned the witch, so I knew she was taken aback by it. "There's more. You don't need to communicate with her." Catalina begged with me, but I knew she would merely follow me around for the next 3 days. If I didn't, I'd rather bring this blight under control as quickly as feasible. It is now, or they bit my tongue so I wouldn't cuss in front of the laundry. We will create a scene for Amber's wedding or rehearsal. I am not about to do that to Amber. I would rather do this on my terms than hers, I stated strongly, tugging down my fresh, clean shirt as I jumped out of bed. "Okay, but why the shirt?" Catalina inquired, looking at me curiously. I could not blame her. It did, after all, show off my now-defined chest fairly nicely. demonstrating what she threw away and will never have again. Because I already have a perfect wife, I replied with a seductive smile, and I don't intend to ever lose her. Then you finish it today. I do not want to see that face ever again. Catalina spoke in a loving, tender tone as her palm caressed my left cheek. It never will with you present, I muttered as I gently kissed the palm of her hand. I noticed her eyes twitching as I did. When I leaned in to taste their silky sweetness, her lips did not resist. My fingertips slid along her stomach as I moved around her. My footsteps conveyed my affection for my wife. The strain in my muscles burnt over the years we spent together. My determination to finally get the witch out of my life once and for all was the foundation of my wife's trust in me to complete this task alone, and I was not about to disappoint her. I was short of breath when I heard the tires squeal as she came to a stop in front of my parents' house. As I exited the front door, "Hello, baby," the witch greeted. I noticed how her eyes moved down my chest as she mouthed, "My. You don't call me that, right? It's Nathan or Mr. Hal. You. I assumed I established that when I left your bum." I hissed as I walked towards her. "Nat, come on. That is in the past. Can't we just move past that and be a family again? I have learned my lesson, I promise. No more males. I swear you can't stop. Can you wait?" "Of course you." I groaned and shook my head. "You're correct. I was a witch, and I was stupid. But you can't see it." Her voice caught in her throat as I raised my hand, displaying the platinum wedding band on my left ring finger. "As you can see, I have a family, and I'm not about to go back to the horror you call marriage, so you can go 3 or 4 times around with someone to support you. You may have deceived me earlier, but those days are done. Nathan, please, let's go somewhere. Talk. I know I can remind you of how great we were together." I heard her tremble as she touched my chest, and I grabbed her wrist. "Get your damn hands off my spouse!" I heard Catalina yell from behind me, smirking at the witch as she ripped her arm from my grasp. "You should run back to the house. You like to spread your legs before my wife leaves the porch." I spoke as Catalina's encouragement flooded into me. "And believe me, that's something I would absolutely like to see. This is not over, Nat. I will get back to you. You can count on it. And nothing can ever compare to what I can provide for you." When she forced herself on me, I realized she was doing it on purpose. It was always her major strategy for getting what she wanted from me. Unlike then, she received no response from me. She will never do such honorable wrongs to the woman behind me. See, unlike you, I do not cheat. So you continue to live in that illusory world. You were unable to keep your promises, and now you must deal with the repercussions. Now get the heck off my parents' land and never come back." I growled, low. "Nat, you're so unfortunate. What did the woman do to you? It appears she has lost her mind. I don't think she heard anything I said. Don't worry, baby. I've not given up on us. I understand you have to keep up your appearance for her sake, but I know you still love me. Yep. She has clearly lost her mind, if she thinks so. We have 17 years together." I raised my hand to stop my wife from running her finger down my chest. Knowing Catalina, she was planning to assassinate the witch. And I would prefer not to have to visit my wife in prison. Given the lack of conjugal visits, I would die both physically and sexually if this occurred. We have 7 years to catch up on. And you have a hard body for me to ravish. But I'll go. I would not want to anger your folks. I'll be in touch, Nathan. We do have a daughter to see off on her wedding day. You never know. We might be on our second honeymoon as well. Yeah. I would rather cut off my own tool before that happens, I murmured as she attempted to seduce me with her swaying bum. You should not say such things to your wife, Nathan. It is pretty hurtful. But I will forgive you this time. Goodbye, baby. I will see you shortly. My flesh crawled when she blew me a kiss as she slipped into her vehicle. Catalina. I huffed her hands, tore at my shirt to rip it off, arched my brow as she spat, and cursed at my shirt as she trampled it to the ground. "Let go of me!" Catalina snarled as she attempted to twist free of my hands. "Do you still love her?" Her head snapped back when I flung my head back and laughed aloud at the absurdity of the situation. "So why did you? I know you. I know every part of you." I gently stroked my fingertips down the left side of her face, laying my palm over her heart. "You would have killed her. I know it, and so do you. I see the truth in her eyes. I was not about to lose you. If I had to pollute myself in order to keep you safe and act foolishly, I would gladly do so again. You mean more to me than she ever did. Do you feel it? I inquired, laying her right hand on my heart, allowing her to feel its frenetic pulse any time she was close. Seeing her faintly nod, "You alone make my heart rush like this." Then she must have gone nuts over the divorce, because hell has to freeze over before I ever consider getting back together with that lady. Really, why would I? I already have the ideal woman for me. Nobody can ever take your place. Not here. Tapping my head, or here, I asked, laying my hand on hers. That remained above my heart. We've spent all these years together. Have I ever given you any reason to doubt me? You promised. She has left your life, and there are no residual sentiments. Catalina inquired, her eyes probing mine. No, I simply feel pity for her. I spoke truthfully. I apologize, Nat, I did not. Sure, it's okay. You were upset because you love me. I also love you, I said, pulling my wife close and feeling her smile on my chest. Get a room. You both. Amber teased from her open car window as she came to a stop. Dad, why are you standing bare-chested in Papa's yard? Your mother stopped by. Amber's face paled, but the police were not summoned. Amber inquired, glancing at each of us. No. When she placed her hand on my spouse, this wise guy intervened to keep me from acting foolishly. I rubbed her back as she held me tightly. As for why your father is presenting this physique to the world, well, I wasn't going to let him wear anything she touched. I was very grateful that the witch kept her hands above my belt. Otherwise, I would prefer not to miss my daughter's wedding due to indecent exposure. And why aren't you raging mad? Amber inquired, perplexed. Because, how could I be? I hold my wife in my arms. How could I be mad if your mother isn't even on my radar? I said. I wasn't attempting to insult her mother in front of her. Do you really mean that? Catalina asked, looking up at me. Of course, I said, leaning down and gently touching Catalina's right cheek. Our lips merged as they always did when I've had the lucky opportunity to feel their contact. You are trapped with me. There are no refunds. I wouldn't dream of it, Catalina muttered before nibbling her lower lip. Amber, could you please dispose of this? Is the garbage for me? She held out my garment to my kid. Wait a second. That is my. I will purchase you a new one, and the only person you should show these off to is me. I could hear the hunger in her voice as she stroked her fingers down my chest. This hard body is just for me to drool over. Catalina gazed up into my eyes as she rubbed her chest against mine. True. Although I would have expected you to want your eye candy, I replied with a sly smirk. Only while we were alone, Catalina teased. Come on, Amber. Let's have breakfast before we go to the spa, she remarked, extending her arm to my daughter. Close the garbage can's lid. Nat, do not stay out here all morning. You are my sexy thing to gaze at. As my wife and daughter entered my parents' home, I merely shook my head and smiled. Dad. Carson's voice rang out as I was doing yard work for my father later that morning in the backyard. There's something wrong. When I observed that expression on my son's face, I inquired, observing that Rosa had accompanied him. What did you and Mom get into? My son had an accusatory, questioning expression on his face which perplexed me, aside from the fact that she thinks she can win me back. Carson nodded, and I informed her I don't cheat and to keep the hell off my parents' land. Why? I asked. The medic's head rested on the ground, and I leaned on his buttocks. The handle. Then you should hear this, Carson remarked, handing me his phone after accessing his voicemail for me. Baby, your father and I are getting back together. Isn't it great? My God, he looks great. You should have seen him that hot. I understand you don't want to hear me talk about father like that. I know the previous 7 years have been difficult for us, especially with your father running away, but he's home now, and we'll be a family again. I know he believes he loves the woman he's with, but we all know he actually loves me. My rage surged through my veins as soon as I heard her voice. I couldn't listen much longer without becoming ill all over my shoes. I have no idea where she got that, but I tell you that we will never get back together, not this century or the next. Your mother clearly has a screw loose, I said, handing my son his phone back. I simply want to make sure. You can never be too sure with Mom. I simply nodded and pocketed my son Syed's phone. Do not let Catalina hear that message. I'd prefer not be in jail for murder, I replied harshly. I already erased it. Good. Come on, help your old man. Rosa could enjoy watching you get all sweaty, I said, grinning frantically as I raised the mattock to my shoulder. I observed Rosa's eyes scanning Carson while she hummed. I tell you, I've never seen that boy take up a tool as quickly as he did that day. We set out to plant some bushes and clean up my mother's flower beds. By the end, we were both sweaty and tired. Do not wear him out. I called after them as Rosa took my son away in his rented van. I was laughing, remembering how similar I was to the two of them when I was younger. However, as I turned my focus to the back door, standing in the open space was my wife, who had the same expression in her eyes as Rosa, and was hurrying towards the door when my wife beckoned me with her finger. Knowing we'd have the house to ourselves for a bit, I'd never pass up shower sex with her. I am old. I am not stupid. Everything went smoothly during the rehearsal dinner. How do you ask? Given how my ex-wife has clearly gone off the deep end. Simple. She did not bother to show where she was, which I greatly appreciated. I didn't care as long as she wasn't around to disrupt things. In my opinion, this is a win-win situation. The next night, David and Amber were taken away to celebrate their last night as singles. I just hope they don't do anything they will regret in the morning. Amber slept at my parents' house after her friends dropped her off following their bachelorette party. Sleeping in my old bed while Alondra slept with her mother, and I, being the ever-so-thoughtful father, took the couch. Carson arrived in the van, accompanied by Rosa and my mother-in-law, as we set out for church. They were holding their wedding at. "You look wonderful, honey," I remarked, as Catalina, her mother, and Rosa all seemed strangely worried about her. Her bridesmaids were too focused on their phones to pay attention. "Thank you, Dad," Amber replied, fighting back tears as she hugged me. "At least a few people are paying attention." She bemoaned, throwing daggers at her friends who swiftly put away their smartphones. The stillness before the storm ended with the witch's voice, the air, and the opening of the room Amber was assigned to. "There's my lovely spouse." "Dad, please don't." "Not today," Amber muttered, staring up at me as if she could sense the speed. My body tightened at the sound of the 304's voice. "Relax, honey. I'm not going to do anything to ruin your day," I remarked, smiling down at her and resting my hands on her shoulders. Net. You do not call, you do not come to see me, you do not even text. I am hurt. I noticed how quickly the bridesmaids pulled out their phones again. I also noticed that Catalina's mother placed a hand on my wife to keep her temper under control. "Mama, who is that?" Alondra inquired in that childlike innocence. "Well, hello." Her words died in her mouth as I spun around, leading her to take a few steps backward. "Okay, I'll confess that the witch still looked good, even though I would never screw her again. You don't speak to my daughter. Do you understand? What portion of myself am I interested in? Nothing. I mean, it has nothing to do with you. Do not understand. You were the reason of our marriage's failure. You were the one who could not keep those legs closed. You were the one who had someone else in our bed on our anniversary and had the audacity to ask me to take you out when I got home. Has it never occurred to you why this was so? Because as soon as I saw that, I realized I was nothing more than a live-in babysitter for you. There's nothing more. You cannot even accept responsibility for your own acts. You had to entice our youngsters into your plans. How far are you willing to sink? I know exactly how low you are willing to go. Amber told me everything about it. Be really grateful that we are now at a church." I saw genuine terror in the witch's eyes as I marched up to her, since I am convinced that if we weren't, who would be laying dead at my feet? Otherwise, I'd strangle that skinny neck of yours for attempting to convince our daughter to sleep with one of your calls overnight. So either shut up and stand over there without saying anything, or leave the room. I'm thankful she didn't say it louder than a whisper. One, for my daughter's benefit, and two, Catalina would have gone crazy. "Do not worry, baby. I realize it's all a ruse. I'll play along." "Mom, come on." "There are some folks who want to talk with you," Carson remarked, walking into the room and taking the witch's hand. "Of course, baby. I need to provide a positive example for my kid. Have you seen your dad? Isn't he simply so handsome?" I nodded to my son when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said as he escorted her out of the room. "Sorry, honey, I did not." Amber laughed. "That was awesome. I believe you should seek assistance for your mother. It doesn't appear that she hears anything I say." I sighed and rubbed the back of my head. "Mom has been like this since you left, and I know she has had to visit someone. She went insane for a while, Mom. Spinning on the ball of her foot helped me look like you to my hubby. Amber, you are already gorgeous, Catalina replied with a motherly tone. But I will assist, bring it out even more. That great man of yours will understand who he belongs to. She spoke. Yet, her gaze was always on me. I got a feeling that was intended for both of us. Of course, I knew whom I belonged to. There was never any doubt in my mind. I believed I'd never accomplish it. I mean, I walked Amber down the aisle as if I were doing it. That moment? How? I'm overjoyed that she unexpectedly phoned me that day. Otherwise, I might have been stubborn and missed the day entirely. I whispered to her, "You, honey," before handing her over to David, who nodded as I placed a hand on his left arm. My mother put a hand on my arm as I slid down between her and Catalina, who was drying her eyes as Amber and David took the few steps together to stand before the priest. Alondra was nestled between David's parents. What shall I say? She has taken a fancy to them, as I am sure they have with her. I could feel the witch's gaze on me the entire time. However, I never made eye contact with her. I was grateful Carson kept her at the other end of the pew. I knew it couldn't have been easy for him. The banquet following the wedding, very sweet. It stung to see my daughter all grown up and about to start her own family. Nonetheless, that's life. Nothing remains the same forever. However, the true entertainment for me was watching the witch run out of the hall. David and Amber were crying uncontrollably when Carson exclaimed angrily, "Why do you think I joined the army to get away from you?" We all heard it plainly. You are nothing more than a lying, cheating woman, and everything that has been done to you is far less than what you deserve, what you did and forced us to do to Dad. I'd say I felt bad for her. But then again, she brought this on herself. After the reception, we saw Amber and David off on their honeymoon. Catalina and I, together with David's parents, gave them a wonderful honeymoon as a wedding present. The day after saying goodbye to my parents and son, the 5 of us went back to Charlotte, where we two needed to move on with our lives. I only discovered out about what happened to the witch after Amber made an offhand remark about having to pick up her mother from the hospital. Following our departure, it appears that the witch drank herself to death and was admitted to a psych facility for evaluation. Not that I cared, but she is their mother, and I'll have to deal with her for the foreseeable future. After all, I have a son to marry off, who, by the way, arrived at my doorstep on May 31st, arm in arm with Rosa. I was a grinner at the time, hugging my youngster closely. It also appears that I was to become a grandfather and father virtually simultaneously. This ancient man seemed to still be in good shape. My wife has been knocked up. Amber apparently miscounted her days, and you know how these things go. It's fascinating to observe my 3-month pregnant wife chatting about baby products and other topics with my 3-month pregnant daughter. It appears that Spain will have to wait a bit. Rosa became a permanent member of our family. Carson is doing well in school, which I am sure Rosa is a big help in. But I will let your mind roam. How much I know, Alondra has never been happier. She has an entire house full of individuals with whom she can converse for hours. I have to remark that life is good. Dear listeners, please express your thoughts here. The comments section appears below. And remember to like, share, and subscribe.